Frank, that's Frank's stuff.
Are you going to move down, Jack?
Yeah, I'm gonna move down. And can you want, or it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
I'll like get off in my phone and be wrapped around it.
Yeah, sorry.
I'd rather you sit in front of me because you're blind. You're like the old one.
For the senior art.
You have an extra roll back.
And we could probably squeeze a little chair in here. There's somebody there. Yeah. Oh, we have. I can read this one. And here's the sheets if you guys want hard copies of anything. There's the sheet if you need a hard copy.
Oh, it's a bigger print too. You're awesome. I was done it. That's what you saw.
Oh.
Is Dodge coming tonight? No.
They don't care. You ever been evacuated?
What's it?
Have you ever been evacuated for a hurricane from anywhere?
Oh yeah, multiple times.
Where did they?
North Carolina.
Where did they send you? Or do you just go somewhere?
We just. Where did we used to go? We went to. Wherever they can kind of house us. So we went to Dayton, Ohio once. We went to Tinker Air Force Base a couple times.
But you go as a group.
We always went. We took airplanes. We got all the, you know, I mean, we got 80 airplanes. You got $4 billion worth of airplanes sitting on the ground. So you
Get it
took
out of
the
harm's
airplanes
way.
and got them out of harm's way, and then left our families back to fend for the hurricane by themselves. So we got hit with. Only twice did we get hit in the same a month apart. Bertha and another one, and got hit twice in about a month. So, and then one time we went up to New York, and the hurricane went up the coast, and ended up coming up through New York and hammered us with winds. And the hurricane itself didn't move, but we got hit with massive thunderstorms and stuff. Shit like great, we left, but nothing happened back where we're at. But, yeah, why is your son evacuating?
We were talking about evacuating Camp Lejeune.
Oh yeah, that's about 10 miles from where my daughter lives.
10 miles from what?
Where my daughter lives, where my wife grew up. Yeah, she's flying out tomorrow. Because my son's wedding is this weekend, and she was going to fly out on Thursday. And I said,
Good time to come early.
Yeah, I mean, the meetings, yeah, they got the big things.
yeah, that's about 60 miles from where I was based.
Were you inland more?
Goldsboro, we're going from Camp Lejeune from Raleigh, past right through Goldsboro.
I see Joe.
Okay, yeah.
Johnson Air Force Base.
Saw Joe there on Saturday.
I don't recall it. I've done it twice in the last year.
70.
It's a beautiful area over there.
Yeah, it's hot as shit.
Yeah.
Too humid. It's just miserable hot. Walls are nice, spring's nice. Winter is 40 and rainy most of the time. But you get a few nice days.
That's awesome. Yeah, grab this. I'm ready to go now.
Last time I talked to him, was like 2.
Hey, Mike, how are you?
This is all right. Tony Rubino, remind me to tell you what he said to me.
We have quite the lineup.
You saw him?
Yeah.
And John Ingram brought his entire offensive and defensive line with him.
What he did. Is something leaking? No, he steals my pen out of here all the time. I got a pencil, which is good for now.
Keith, Carol's going to be, should be here about 6:26.
Okay? You guys can start. You can catch up.
Call the meeting to order, call the roll.
Trustee Fenton?
Here.
Trustee Dodge? Trustee Guerra?
Here.
Trustee Ruzick? Trustee Calandrello?
Here.
Trustee Carroll?
Here.
Mayor Pico?
Here.
Okay. All right. So, good evening. I just wanted to do a quick recap of last week. Last week we talked about the $1.267 million in reductions. The board asked that I identify an additional $433,000 in reductions for a total of $1.7 million. Tonight, I'm going to be able to give you $104,500 of those reductions, and the remaining $328,500 will be identified throughout the departmental hearings. The $104,500 is a reduction in vehicles purchased. On average, we budget $770,000, and we're presenting only $665,500 worth of vehicles tonight. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We are still evaluating the lease versus own. However, that will be discussed at a future, at an upcoming board meeting. Tonight, however, we're going to be presenting our capital and technology budget and the amount totaling about $23.5 million. We had well over $39.9 million in asks. However, myself, along with our directors and the budget team, had to prioritize and identify which projects needed to occur in fiscal 19 versus what could be postponed. Last year, we had a much larger capital budget because of the buyout of 9750. As stated then, it was a one-time bump. I'm going to ask Anne Marie to talk about our funding sources prior to me going over the capital request. It should be noted that we have put together 2 capital budgets, the first being presented with our current funding sources, and a second of what we could include if we were to add a 1% restaurant tax. So, Anne?
They all have them. Okay, so I kind of handed out 2 packets. It's the same packets of information that are on the iPads, but I thought maybe hard copies would be easier. We could also pull it up on the screen if anybody wants us to do that. It's really hard to see when the sun is shining, so we thought we would just start this way. So the first sheet on the top is the kind of the summary of the revenue sources. Customarily, we use the same sources every year to fund our capital budget. We consistently budget and set aside some of our general fund revenues to fund capital, and then we also set aside the road and bridge tax that we collect each year. It's the levy that the township, or I should say the township highway, whatever, if I'm saying it right, levies, and then we get a share of it depending on what share we are of their total area. So we set that aside on an annual basis to fund capital. We also, every other year, when we sell vehicle stickers, we set that revenue aside to fund capital. The thought behind it, I believe, is just it's related to roads. It's cars on our roads causing us to have to maintain them, do repairs, so we've always set those funds aside. Park Development Fund, that's the impact fees that we collect when new developments come into town. We can only spend on new type park items, not replacements. So if we build a new park, we charge it to that fund. If we're going to replace the equipment in a park, we charge that to the general fund. Home rule sales tax is going to make another loan to the Main Street Triangle for about $200,000. This is to cover consulting fees that we may incur throughout 2019. This is usual and customary. This is how we've been doing it all along since inception of the TIF. It's set up as a loan as opposed to an actual transfer of the revenue. CIP revenues, the majority of that is actually made up of STP funding that we have. Most of the projects that we're doing for next year have either 70-20 or 70-30 sharing or 80-20 sharing. The biggest ones that we're receiving next year, and we only receive the funds if we incur the expenditures. It's on a reimbursement basis. The biggest two projects that we're going to be receiving funds for are 151st Street from Ravinia to West, and then also the 151st Street roundabout. Once again, if we don't spend the funds, we don't receive the reimbursement. Home rule sales tax is the next item that we consistently use for capital. You'll notice that it's not the entire amount of sales tax that we receive for the year, because we do use a portion of our sales tax to make debt service payments on the term loans that we have outstanding, as well as the 9750 bonds. Water and sewer, that's the revenue source from the water and sewer. When we budget our capital, we make sure that the rates we have in place are sufficient to fund the capital that we're budgeting, and they are for 2019. I believe through 2020, our rates are set by ordinance. Commuter parking fund, very small amount. Commuter parking fund has just one improvement that needs to be done, so we obviously use funding from that fund. And then the last item that you see there on the list is the restaurant tax. You see it's over as a potential additional revenue source. It's not being assumed that it's an actual revenue source at this time. But we did go through and identify different capital items that we would fund if that restaurant tax happens to make it through the process. So you'll see on the following pages that I believe Joe's going to go through that the capital budget's listed in two columns. One is within existing funding sources, and then the other column adds, if we were to get a restaurant tax in place, what we'd also be able to fund.
Is this 1% or 1.5%?
This is 1%. I'm done.
So we want to try and keep this meeting on track. So I thought, you know, in the one packet, we have it broken down into different sections. And so I thought, after each section, we can stop before we go to the next section, and if an official has a question or a comment, we have the directors here and their support staff to answer those questions in detail if you have any questions.
And the order of these, I'm sorry, the order of these projects are actually in fund order, so everything that's funded by the general fund is first, and then park development, so they go in the order of our funds.
So we're going to start with village facility improvements, and these are various facility improvements throughout the village. And you can see here we're starting out with building condition evaluation matrix for $17,000, demolition of the Robertson Davidson Center, floor carpeting replacement, village hall improvements, public works roof replacement, public works site expansion, fencing, and the public works security system upgrades and replacements. And as you can see that we were able to fit all those in our proposed capital budget there. So we can go as in much detail.
What are the improvements on the village hall?
Yeah.
I want a little bit of detail behind it, that's all.
Sure. No, you could go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, the detail's actually on the sheets in front of you, but we have no problem going through it. So the village hall improvements are the main entryway on the south end of the building, as well as the east side of the building, I believe, Carrie. And then also some reconfiguring internally of the village hall for within departments. I think that is all that's in there for, oh, and then the CPAC guard shack, the air conditioning is $10,000. So the majority of it is really going to be spent on the rehab right outside the front doors. So, and I probably should have explained that. So this just kind of provides a summary of the project, and then this detailed sheet kind of gives you a little bit more information on it, and then obviously we can answer any questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton.
could someone explain what all of this, what they're doing
For which item?
Which item?
in that area? The recreation center, the lower level administration. I know what lower level, well, no, lower level rec admin, lower level rec demolition, architectural evaluation. I know we're doing a $60,000 reconfiguration,
Yeah, so those are in
the main entrance rehab.
Yeah, so those are in the out years that you're looking at, Trustee Fenton? In that same line item, yep.
No, I know, since somebody explained all of this.
Yeah.
And is this all life safety issues? Then in other words, is it something that's really important that needs to be done?
The Village Hall main entry, it's become problematic over the years as several years ago, the brick pavers that were installed there original to the facility were removed and an overlay was done with asphalt. As you can see, it has become a tripping hazard where the asphalt abuts the concrete and is also impacting the brick around the base of the facility. I strongly encourage us to continue to move forward with that one so we can improve that that area. The Village Hall internal reconfiguration, that's taken advantage of the movements that occurred this year with regards to the BIS department. We have the ability to relocate the Bradford system, which is the clerk's filing system that's down in the lower level. Right now that's taking up a very nice office space, and it would provide an opportunity to reconfigure some of the administration area and the finance area to help segregate the HR department, which right now is grouped with admin. So that's more of a process improvement with regards to HR. So people that come in and have to talk to HR, they're not going right through administration. The guard shack AC, that was requested by the Recreation Department, Parks Department, just to improve the conditions over there. The lower level admin is, as you're aware, the rec admin was formerly the police department, so it's the removal of the cells. That's going to be extremely costly, and that will provide additional office space to allow the recreation department to improve their operations. That will be a costly endeavor, removing all the jail cells that are down on the lower level. So that's what's 20 and 21. Both of those actually go together. One is evaluation and the removal, and the other one is the reconfiguration of their facility.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Carroll.
if I could just ask as a kind of a point of order, some of those items, the last two items that Director Ingram talked about, as Director Mampy mentioned, are items that are for fiscal year 2020 and 2021. Since we're only talking about revenue budget hearing tonight for fiscal year 2019, I would prefer that our conversation to stick to that for now. Any of those other conversations, while everyone has a right to know about them, I think probably should be taken offline, or this hearing can go very long.
So I would, I guess I respectfully would disagree if these are part of our capital plan and somebody here has a question about it. We should go ahead and answer it. I don't know when we'll have another capital meeting, so we might as well plan for it appropriately. So I don't see a problem with asking the questions. Are there any other questions with what we've gone through so far? go ahead and move on.
So the next one is the village facility improvement over at the FLC. The gym curtain and the pillar pads, those need replacement. Yeah, this one is a safety issue. In talking to Director Couch and Director Flores. Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Calendro.
how old is that, the gym floor over there? The gym floor of the FLC? The gym floor, the main gym floor.
Oh, the gym floor?
It's patchwork. Historically, when the temperature would rise and the humidity would rise, and John probably could answer it better than I can, but the floor would bubble because it's adhesive, and there was something wrong with the adhesive, and Dennis Wakirka was working on it, so I think that's been a problem long-term. It's been original since I've been here, so I'm sure it was here long before.
As far as I know, it is original. The best fix for that is going to be the installation of the HVAC system to control the atmosphere and keep those temperature and humidity fluctuations to a minimum.
Because that's a rubber floor, if I remember correct, or rubber type. It's not a wood floor, it's a rubber, whatever. And so it's original since FLC, and I think FLC has been since I've been alive, so we're talking about 30 plus years. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Guerra.
if I may add, I believe that building and the floor was a major conversation about whether or not there should be air conditioning in that building, am I correct? And it was the humidity that caused the problems with the floor because we don't have it air conditioned. So we might save a lot in the long run if we did have it.
Okay. Next.
All right. The next one is, these are all related to our sportsplex. We have the HVAC replacement of the existing soccer turf. And then what we did put off, if we had the additional revenues, would be lighting upgrades and replacing the existing track surface.
Oh, he's looking there.
Oh, and we're only going to do a portion of the HVAC system this year, with the remaining being done the following year. And I will add to that, by spreading that over the couple of years, we would be spending additional dollars, I believe, and Director Ingram, about $300,000 more by splitting that up into 2 years.
Yeah, there is, because we are splitting it up, there will be some cost increase because the contractor has to stage multiple times as opposed to doing all the work at once. The numbers that we've gotten in, they continue to get tightened up, but there still will be an impact.
So, based on what you just said, then, if we were to do all of the HVAC replacement, regardless of whether we decide to increase revenue opportunities or not, we'd be looking at another $207,000 to do all of them this year? Because you said it would cost us additional $300,000 to do it over 2 years.
No, actually, the overall cost, I think, is closer to $2 million. We're splitting it up.
Okay.
Oh, that's right.
Because what we have here for the two is 1.3 million. A little over. For the HVAC.
So the way this is listed is the actual total cost that we had originally on the CIP list was about $2.4 million. John got better refined numbers that we went over last week. The $805,000 actually replaces 2 of the 4 units and does all the electrical work that needs to be done. The 507 is an additional amount that we would budget, but it doesn't cover everything. So, but it was what we had available if we had that additional revenue source. So there's still additional amounts that we would not be able to budget for in 2019 that would be budgeted for in 2020. And you can kind of see that on this detailed sheet.
So the $300,000 savings would bring us down to, if we did it all at once, we would save $300,000, but that would cost us an additional $850,000 or $880,000. Is that correct? correct?
Yeah.
in this
Okay.
year. Yeah.
Any other questions on this section? Yep.
The next, we have the village facilities over at CPAC. So we're looking at the zero-depth slide tower staircase maintenance, variable frequency drives, the vertical turbine replacements, upgrade grates and walkways at the T-pool. The two additional items we would add in the event that we do get additional funding, would be the elevated walkway repairs and fencing. And Director Couch is here if you have any specific questions on that. And Director Flores, I could.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Guerra?
the elevated walkway, Gary, is that a safety hazard?
We'll be
No.
opening for this year. I had some additional steel reinforcements welded in prior to opening this season. You can feel that the fiberglass panels are soft, but there's no chance of anybody to go through because of the additional welding. We had JEV engineering come out, identify out there that you can correct it. I had the welding done.
And what about the tower staircase? Same
Tower
thing?
staircase, with the funding we had available in 2018. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Pricing came back a little higher than the original quotes I received. In 2018, we're going to be able to handle the stairs and landings on the zero-depth staircase going up, so I think it's roughly 2.5, 3 stories. The dollar amount requested for 2019 moving forward is to replace the wooden spindles that currently surround the entire staircase and the platform above it.
Surrounding, it's not the
Correct.
staircase
They
itself.
we're starting to have issues with rot and constantly repainting them. The staircase we have for the lazy river, everything is steel. It's a lot lower maintenance moving forward. You won't ever have to replace them again. So that's the thought process there.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenn?
I just have a question, since you're hopping around here, but not you, them. The replacement of the soccer turf out at the Sportsplex, have we ever gone out to get anything for sponsorship to replace it?
We have a sponsorship event happening within the next couple of weeks.
My question was, have we ever gone out in the past to get sponsorship for stuff that we're doing? And if we have, where has that money gone? For example, like bleachers out at the ball fields, backstops, benches, stuff like that.
We've had some sponsorship opportunities, I believe, at the Sportsplex. I would have to defer to Director Flores on specifics in there. I thought the scoreboard, I believe. But in answer to your question on specific repairs, no, we have not. And that's something we started preparing for this year, and we'll continue to look at trying to get sponsorships for those types of naming rights and naming rights of the different facilities and different things around the community.
So the answer is no.
Correct.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Calabro?
just a little backstory on that is that we had a person that was actually going to be focusing on sponsorship, and that person is no longer with the village. Who's a part-time person who was kind of actively doing both the programming, which we've done a successful job of Taste of Orland and whatnot, and then the second part was building, and that person did the research and was kind of ready to jump off and then left the village. So I don't think it's something we forgot about, just of all the things we just haven't got to it yet. But I know that Director Gary and I have talked about it before in a couple of meetings, and it's on the radar, just not, it's next in the cube, I guess, is the best way to say it.
I'll just add to that. We have actively been trying to get sponsorships. We were successful in getting $75,000 for the Taste of Orland, and we are working on another potential sponsorship that could help secure close to $80,000 a year for the next 3 years that we're looking at. And again, I mean, we're continuing to try and identify sponsorships, but we need to make sure that
But is
we have
that
all the
for one
documents
event,
together.
or is that for multiple replacements of items?
Well, we're making the sponsorship an a la carte. We're not looking for them to say, hey, repair our soccer field and we'll name it after you. What we're doing is we're trying to identify areas that they could possibly have naming rights to see what those dollar amounts are. We are trying to get as much money from our vendors as possible, or in sponsorship dollars as possible, to help offset the cost.
Note that we've been joined by Trustee Ruzick. Go ahead, next.
Right now, we're at the Village Facility Improvements, the Orland Park Health and Fitness Center. The HVAC control integration, that's the hardware and software. Pool floor replacement, and that's it for those two.
So one question I have here is, didn't we just have the pool drained?
We did.
So,
Yeah.
you know where I'm going next.
The pool gets drained every year. Orland Park Health and Fitness Center staff, they work with a contractor to come in and clean the pool every year.
Okay.
This year, the pool was drained for a little bit more extended period of time, and when there's no water in it, sometimes what happens, the plaster surface on the bottom of the pool delaminates, and that's what occurred this time. It had apparently occurred probably about 10 years ago, according to what the records show, and repairs were made. The useful life of the pool bottom has reached the end of its life expectancy, so the whole bottom. We made repairs this year as a stopgap measure, just so we can get the pool open, recognizing that the whole thing needs to be redone next year.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton?
I had asked Anne Marie what the total cost that we've spent out at the Orland Park Health and Fitness Center as of our purchase date to date.
I have something together here. So the total amount that we've budgeted, we haven't actually spent everything that we've budgeted over the last 2 years. Some of it was rolled from 17 to 18, and some of the 18 budget hasn't been spent yet. So far we've budgeted just over $3 million for not only repairs, new equipment, but also development agreement related expenditures. And we've spent about $1.9 million of that. So that includes the wetland mitigation, it includes the underground detention that we shared the cost of, and then it also includes all the improvements that we've done internally to the building.
And the dehumidifier,
The Dectron,
which is
yes.
about half of that.
Yes.
And the new floor, the tile.
Yeah, Dectron, the HVAC
All the
controls,
ductwork, the
locker
pool.
room improvements, ductwork.
Boilers.
Yep, boilers, pool
Spa sand
heaters.
filter.
Yep.
ADA doors, you can go through a whole list.
What is the total again?
The budgeted amount is just over $3 million, and we've spent about $1.9 million of that amount so far.
Okay. Any other questions on this?
And just continuing with the village facility improvements at the Civic Center, again, this would be contingent on a possible additional revenue source, but it would be the HVAC heating boiler replacement.
So all the capital projects that we just went through are those that are customarily budgeted within our general fund or our recreation fund. So they're usually funded by those general operating dollars that I talked about. Because they exceed what that amount is, just like last year, we'll once again be using some home rule sales tax to fund some of these kind of general maintenance and operations expenditures on the capital side.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Guer?
So at the Civic Center, we have nothing budgeted for next year. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have identified some things that do need to be addressed there, but without additional dollars, we had to take a look at what we, prioritize.
I get that. It's a revenue generator for the village, and right now, it has not had a subsidy, so it's finally turned that corner. And correct me if I'm wrong, what was proposed was $40,000 for for the sound system in that building, and I think everyone here has suffered through the sound system next door. It's the original.
Right. We're going to go through that technology piece right now, and that you are correct.
Is it in
that
there?
It is in there if we have some additional dollars for that.
But if we don't have the new tax, you're suggesting we should not do that and risk losing the revenue and the gains we've made?
We would need to look at doctoring that up and trying to muddle through another fiscal year with the existing sound system in there like we did this past year.
And yet we know Kiwanis, which is our longest-standing client over there, has already said, because they've lost money with issues with the sound system, that they will leave. They'll have no choice if we can't provide a reliable sound system. And $40,000 is gonna risk that. I mean, I know Frank's been there after hours working on the system. We've had, I don't know how many outside contractors that we've spent money on, and they all go back to, it's old as dirt. There's actual tubes in the system in there, the old vacuum tubes. We still have those over there, so if they need parts and it finally totally crashes, we're on eBay trying to find them.
Tubes are great. I got some tube amps at home.
Do you? Mm-hmm. Okay, do you use it like they do over there?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I bet.
I would need to defer to Director Flores on the
Flores?
specifics of this, because he's
mean
probably
Director
been the
Florentine?
individual. I'm sorry?
You mean Director Florentine? You mean Frank, right? Not,
Yes.
not-
What did I say? Did I say
Flores.
Flores.
Oh, I'm sorry,
She's
Florentine. I'm
getting
sorry.
very confused.
Thank
She's
you.
good,
So-
she's not that good.
Director Florentine, I stand corrected.
I mean, the system is aged. We know it, and we do put Band-Aids on it to keep it going for the events. There is a lot of staff time that's brought over there, and traditionally, I don't think this was an IT function, but we sort of inherited it because of the problems, and we can respond pretty quickly. So, we look for ways to be able to fund it so we can change out some of that older equipment, but until that happens, this is what we're left with.
Okay, moving on.
So if, with the board's permission, what I'd like to do is finish the capital and then go back to technology and spend some time on technology after we go through the rest of the capital projects.
That works.
Is that okay? All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee
Sorry-
Fenton.
Sorry to be a pest. Just a question. In the studies that you have that we're going to have the results in November or December, have they put in the study the fact that the Civic Center no longer is a Civic Center as of December 31st, 2019, and what they feel the purpose of that building should be? Is that part of the study?
No.
I can't answer if it's part of the study or not, but it won't, what happens is the bonds are actually paid off on December 1st of 2019, so it'll still be a Civic Center authority. We'll have to actually go to the General Assembly to dissolve that authority, but that's the point at which we're able to do that.
Okay.
And in answer to your question, it is not part of the study at this point in time.
Okay. Just wondering.
Go ahead to vehicles.
Right. Vehicles. So we identified about $665,000 worth of vehicles. On average, I believe the ask was about $1.4 million. On average, we usually budget about $770,000. And then I've reduced that by about $103,000 to see if we could stretch out some of the existing vehicles, the life of the existing vehicles a little bit more. So right now, we're proposing 10 public safety vehicles, 2 recreation vehicles, and 3 parks vehicles. And I can defer to Director Ingram, who can possibly give some more detail on the specifics of those vehicles.
We'll refer to Mr. Morgan.
And I'll defer to Mr. Morgan.
10 police vehicles. Unfortunately, the Ford police interceptor we operate has jumped significantly in acquisition costs. So that took a hit on the overall replacement funds. 2 recreation vans. One of the vans they operate is a 9-passenger capability. The other 2 vans are 15, and they really need to get to another 15-passenger van. The Parks Department vehicles are 1-ton, we call them dump plow and spreaders, year-round operation vehicles, and then a crew cab truck is proposed to be replaced also up there. One side note, it's 3 vehicles for parks plus 1 utility cart. The utility cart is deemed a Kubota here, and that is a year-round piece of equipment critical in parks and grounds as snow removal.
Any questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee
are
Rizzo?
these purchased, to be purchased, or leased?
So, yeah, so earlier, we had talked about, right now, we're proposing purchase. We are still evaluating the purchase versus lease option right now. We're still evaluating whether or not there's a benefit to it. And we are going to be bringing that to an upcoming board meeting to have the board make a recommendation to the board. So at this time, what we've got would be purchased right now, but could change.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
I think I already know the answer to this, Joe, but I'm not 100% certain. When we evaluated vehicles for purchase, did we take into consideration, based on our conversation in executive session, the personnel that might be unfunded and therefore the programs that might go with it when deciding how many vehicles we need in each department?
Yes.
That's all.
Okay, go on.
So now we're talking about some parks improvements. So we've got the John Humphrey Complex grading improvements. We have dugout, backstop, bleacher paving, Centennial Park Master Plan.
Yeah.
Veterans Park player bench replacement. We've got a portion of the pavilion roofing replacement. Ketchy Park play unit replacement. Centennial Park Pavilion. Laurel Hill Park Pavilion. Centennial Park permanent porta-johns. Centennial Park Marina. Sterling Ridge Park improvements. I'm not even going to pronounce that. Park improvements, thank you. Various tennis court improvements, and Frontier Park play unit replacement. That last one is if we get additional funding.
Trustee Calendro.
Gary, how many parks in Orland Park are more than 20 years old? Do you know that answer?
Off the top of my head, I want to say roughly 41%.
41%, and we have, what, 64 parks?
Correct.
So about 20 parks are over 20 years old at least?
Yes, I have one that's 26, and then on down, as of next year, I want to say we'll be at 56%.
Oh, Carrie, can you speak in a little bit more?
I want to say as of January 1, I want to say we'll be at 56% will be 20 years.
34 parks.
And Gary, did you do any research about what other park districts do, since we don't have a park district, we're a village, but what the replacement plans for, say, New Lenox or Frankfurt or our competition for residents?
We did reach out to some of our peers in other communities while they are park districts and dedicated solely on parks. The main ones that do have a program in place replace 3 to 4 per year, and they try to do that allows them a 15-year cycle of rotation. So each park is replaced roughly every 15 years. And that's pretty much an industry standard.
And I know we have a lot of issues with replacement parts. So could you give an estimate after 15 years, replacement parts are difficult, after 20, after 30, after 10?
It depends on the manufacturer. It varies from design of each play set. But at Helen Park, I believe that one's going to be 20 next year off the top. I'm going off the top of my head, forgive me. We had a slide that was vandalized several years ago. It could not be replaced. We had to retrofit it with a different type of an apparatus. So a $500 repair turned into $8,000.
I think we're just, I know that there's only one full park, and I would like to see more parks redone, and I know we have a tight budget. I think we have to thank our past fathers, Mayor Owens, Mayor McLaughlin, and the board, some of you who are still on the board, for saying if you build a subdivision, you have to give us a park, which is great because we have a park, neighborhood park for everyone, and that's attracted the young families, that attracted the quality, and we have great schools, so we should have great parks. So I just, we're kind of getting the kickback for our successes in the future. So I myself like more parks done. I think having 20 parks over, what do we say, 20 years old at least, is our residents expect more, and I just think we need to focus more on improving these parks. And if you look at, I have the list in front of me, Gary, so I should have just gave you it, but I just think one a year is unacceptable to our residents.
This, not to contradict you, just an FYI, a little bit more elaboration on the Sterling Ridge Park improvements. That's an actual development of a passive park site. That location is roughly 1.35 acres or so. That's located about a block from Deer Point Estates. So there's a fully functional playground there. So there wasn't a need to make that a fully developed site. So the land was donated when the subdivision was built. So we were putting something in per the agreement.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
It may take a couple of you to answer this one, but while we're talking about redoing parks, we all get the Parks and Rec magazine because we don't have a park district, so we're, as the board, are equivalent of park district commissioners. Has that study that we just commissioned looked at, or have staff looked at, the issue that with our aging population, there may be some geographic areas of the village where there aren't as many children anymore? And if so, have we looked at maybe converting some of those parks when they do get rebuilt to more senior-friendly, passive exercise type spaces like I keep seeing in that monthly magazine?
We have had several conversations between senior staff and the village manager's office regarding the conversion of some of the playground sites to a more passive location. We evaluate each site on an annual basis based on the repairs and the amount of visits that we're actually making there. As far as identifying the demographics of each subdivision, I don't have that type of information at this time.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick.
And, on that comment, I think it's difficult to do because I just got a complaint the other day from fairly young grandparents who, grandparents today are very active in watching their grandchildren. And they were complaining about the park being old. And they were young grandparents. They were probably in their late 50s, early 60s.
Was this Colonial Park, the email that you had forwarded
Yes,
earlier?
yeah.
Just an FYI, we did learn a life lesson from that one. We no longer install any type of red on our apparatuses because typically within 2 to 3 years they turn pink.
Yeah.
So you can really tell the age on them. We stick with a lot more of a neutral palette now, but
Yeah.
I
But anyways,
remember
that's just,
installing that part.
but to your point, just because the population is aging, they may be watching their grandchildren and they want to take their grandchildren to parks.
I will add this too, though, that we do have safety inspections on all of our park equipment. They are safe. If they're not, Director Couch and his team do a great job in making sure that it is safe. For that, it might not be, it may be look a little, I'll just call it vintage, as my mother-in-law would say when we say that things are old, it's vintage. But they are still functional.
Mr. Chairman, just one quick question.
Trustee Calandrello.
I know, and this might be a topic towards the end of the middle, but we're selling some property for the village, a good amount of property. Where's that money going to go? And now you kind of know where I want to segue to this.
I mean, right now, that's the next phase right now to identify how much we're going to market that. As you know, the board just approved the approval of that contract. We're working through that. That's the next phase, is evaluating, what we're going to sell that land for. As far as where that funding is going to end up, we were probably in the general fund. However, if the board so chose to designate it to another area, we can
I would think.
Mr. Chairman?
Sorry, go ahead.
Trustee Ruzick.
I was going to say, I would just think that it would go to capital. I mean, we're selling assets. I think it should go to capital as opposed to our general fund. But
I echo that.
I guess my comments overall on the parks are, one, to your recent point there, Trustee Calandrello, about the sales. I would agree with Trustee Ruzick. It absolutely should go to capital. It's a one-time thing. It should go to capital. And I think that's probably the plan. The question will be where in capital, and that'll be our decision to make. Secondly, regarding the parks, when you look at the park list here in over 20 years, over 20 years, over 20 years, in the long-term plan, I mean, everything got built in a very short period of time, which was great that we built it, but there, as is not unusual, when you do it and you know you're not going to be around for 20 years, you don't really worry so much about the long-term issues, and somebody else later has to deal with that issue. And when you have all of your capital bought in a very short period of time and all these improvements, well, guess what? They're all going to start failing at the same time, which is going to put a burden, which is happening now, right when we're also having a shift in our economy and everything else. So it's it's kind of a double whammy. With that said, we have 64 parks. If you look at 64 parks, if you let them go 20, 21 years, you're basically talking, redoing 3 a year, if you let them, if that's our plan. So I think something that would be helpful is, it may not impact this year, but going forward, is to start to say, okay, looking at the parks and how many we have, what can we reasonably expect for both a lifespan of those? Not the pie in the sky, we want to replace everything every 12 years. Let's be realistic. We're not going to replace 5 parks a year. So are we going to get 20 years, 21 years, 23, 24, whatever it is, and how many parks are we going to replace every year, and start getting on that plan so that every year we replace that many parks, and so that 20 years from now, the next board doesn't have the same problem with 25 parks expiring at the same time. So that would be my suggestion, is to have that, some kind of a longer-term plan for how many we need to do each year, and it seems to me it's going to be roughly 3-ish, would be my guess.
Just to kind of touch on that, we are looking for funding in 19 for the master park plan, which is a study done by an outside firm that will evaluate each one of the sites and prioritize each site. And it's typically good for 5 to 10 years, so you can evaluate and update as you move along.
So I think that's going to be very helpful for our going forward plan, but I think after this year, we need to really start thinking about that. And I do know that we also have some debt servicing that falls off the books here in a few years, so hopefully those funds in a couple of years will be more available to maybe start playing catch-up on that a little bit. But again, if we play catch-up and did 10 in 1 year, 20 years from now, you're going to have 10 that you're going to have to do. So it puts us in the same boat. So it'd be good to have it would be good to have that master plan, and good to have a plan going forward that's more consistent and something that's actually going to be manageable, as opposed to, we hit the lottery this year, and then it just puts it off, puts the problem off for some time.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Guerra.
I see the Centennial Path, or Centennial Park path extension to the southwest corner of Centennial Park, right with the parks. You have that for 2020, yet wouldn't that lead to the new intersection, God willing, 159th Street gets finished, and we'll have a traffic light there at 104th Avenue and 159th?
Yeah, we originally had this slated to be funded in 2019, the $2 million you're referring to.
No, I'm looking not at that, that's
That's
on the south
104th
side.
Avenue bike path.
I'm looking at Centennial Park path extension.
Oh, that is-
Design and paved path.
This is to try to reconfigure the stone path system that we put in on the southwest corner of the complex.
This isn't that paved bicycle path that comes awful close to
No,
159th.
no, this is that paved bicycle path at the train tracks. You've got the circle with a park ID sign. We have a limestone path that went all the way to the east, until it could go no longer, and then circled back around to that fishing pier on the
okay,
south.
so-
This is to make it a permanent path system versus a stone system. A lot of it was disrupted with this project going on at 159.
How much pavement do we really need to get from our bike path now? The paved path on the north side, up to 159th Street?
I go to 159th Street at the tracks.
Close. but not,
No.
No, it goes right there, that circle turnaround right at 159th Street. We're paved to right there.
so
To
when the
go completely around, I probably need a half a mile to go from there east.
She's just talking.
no, I'm just talking for the intersection at 104th Avenue.
Oh. From the tracks to 104th, is that 4 blocks?
It's not much, right? Because the paved
trying to
path, I
think
know
of-
there's a turnaround.
It's probably 2 blocks. It's about halfway between
No,
where the
no,
current,
it's-
where the current pavement is.
No,
You are currently, well, I walk it just about weekly. So it's about at where the train tracks is where it gets to 159th Street. And that's about halfway between 108th and 104th, roughly.
No,
the train tracks.
I'm on the east side of the tracks. I'm at 104th Avenue, the the path that comes around, then there's a loop.
So you're
for a
talking about
turnaround.
south of 159th, not
No,
north
I'm
of
talking
159th.
north. The paved path that's in Centennial Park, we do it for walks and all, it's known for fundraisers. And they come close to 159th, there's a little loop that they turn around and go back. It's on the east side of the tracks, comes darn close to 150, I'm gonna say not more than 50 feet.
Yeah. Yes, there used to be a swing gate right there.
Yes.
There's, I believe, either a pile of stone or a jersey block once this construction project started.
Trustee Guerra, that path will connect into the $2 million path. And that path will connect Centennial Park along
It's on the
159th
south side of the
Street
street.
to 104th Avenue, right?
Right, but I'm just, I'll argue the one on the south side of the street later, but on the north side, people want to cross. That's a big connection people are anxious for a bike path. If we can get closer.
That number's baked into that 2 million is what.
The north side is baked into the 2 million as well?
That's what she just
Yeah.
said.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So to be perfectly clear, the $2 million project encompasses connecting it across 159th Street, so we're
Yes.
done.
Yes, there is
Thank
going to
you.
be a safety crossing at 104th to get you across the street, so you can continue to go westward to connect to the Centennial Park path.
And the
Yes.
plan for that is to connect the east side of 104th over?
Yes. But that's in this $2 million number for next year.
Okay.
So anything else? I have a couple other questions on the Parks Improvement. Anybody else? So the master plan you're talking about, though, that's in here, it says Park Master Plan is 60,000. According to this, that's for Centennial Park. That's not for all the parks.
It should be a master parks plan.
It's a master parks plan, not for Centennial Park. Okay, that changes my question, because I was going to say, why are we doing a Centennial Park master plan? We need that. Okay, perfect. And then the John Humphrey Complex improvements, 100 grand, that's on top of what we've already set aside, correct? Which brings us to the total amount we need to do the whole thing.
Yes.
Is that correct? That was the plan. I just want to make sure that that's right. Okay. All right, go ahead.
And now we're going to move on to streets and infrastructure improvements and maintenance. So the pavement condition evaluation program, the roadway maintenance program, 151st Street construction, and the roundabout 151st and West, 151st Street install new utility poles, sidewalk gap and repair program, streetlight installation program, and roadway median maintenance. That's all baked into this year's funding.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Fenton.
I have a question for the 151st Street. Of that 1.5 million, how much of it is grant money?
70%.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Ruzick.
And it's the same for the roundabout, 70-30?
Yes.
Okay, so of the 5.5 million, we're putting in roughly 1.8. Okay. Any other questions on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Ruzick.
the roadway median maintenance, I assume that includes LaGrange Road? Is that predominantly just LaGrange Road, or?
So,
Mike's off.
your mic is off.
That's well over 100 sites.
Oh, that's well over 100 sites. I was just asking about the roadway median maintenance of 400,000, so
That's well over 100 sites. I can give you the locations.
that's okay.
So,
But does include LaGrange, though.
any other questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Calendro?
The road maintenance program, so that's our neighborhood streets, John?
Yes.
Is that number, is that historically about the number we spend? I feel like that's a little light for neighborhood street programs.
It's generally about what we spend. It is. Let me put it this way, it's generally about what we get.
Parks and streets, two things I always ask more money for. Thanks.
Trustee Calandrello, we did put I think about $500,000 more in the program last year because we had that bump from 9750, so the sale at 9750. So we did have a little bit more money in there last year.
And then maybe I would have to ask someone who, Public Works Committee, are we still trying to have a study, the ARD?
ARA study, yeah, we should be getting a report from them. I'm anticipating the October committee will hear a report.
And they're going to tell us the bad news of how many streets we need to fix.
Hopefully it'll be better news.
Okay.
Based on all the money we've been putting into the roads.
Nice spin, John.
You know, if I could just add, I'll defer to Director Ingram on this, but, you know, right now we do curb to curb. We could stretch that money out and get more neighborhoods if we did more patching as opposed to curb to curb. It doesn't look as pretty, but if the board wanted to try and touch more neighborhoods, we could do that.
That would put a defer, but I believe that would defer these costs just like we've deferred the parks,
Right.
which I don't think is a good long-term
Band-Aid.
plan.
It's a Band-Aid.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Carroll?
Trustee Calendro teed up the easy pitch for me here. If the ARI study comes back not so great, and I don't know, Director Ingram's the pro in this stuff, whether the somewhat milder winters we've been having are better for our pavement condition or worse, I don't know. But I noticed that even if we do the restaurant tax, there's no allocation of additional resources for, as Trustee Calendro said, one of our biggest expenditures under the capital budget. Was there any reasoning why there was no additional money thrown towards that in case that ARI study comes back negative?
I mean, again, it was just based on the projects that we needed to get completed for 2019. We needed to identify what our priorities were, so.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go back to this roadway median maintenance. So this is part of our maintenance program. Why is it in our capital budget and not part of our operations?
Yeah, historically, for items such as this, which are related to the infrastructure and their significant dollar amounts, we have included them in our capital budget. Regular maintenance, such as mowing or something like that, of our regular buildings, we have not.
So what kind of maintenance is this then on the medians? Especially considering some of them are new.
What's that?
It's maintenance of all the landscaping, it's maintenance, brick paver maintenance, it's irrigation.
So it is maintenance like the grass cutting.
It is,
It's
but it has
maintenance.
historically, just because of the large dollar amount, and the increased areas in which we have to use contract services.
So I understand completely that we have increased areas. I know you and I have had these discussions before I was even sitting in this chair about the landscaping, which is beautiful, but it's also extremely maintenance intensive and extremely costly. But in my mind, if it's maintenance, it's no different than our parks or in front of the village hall or wherever we have to mow and maintain. It's still, we have to do it. It costs money, but it still, to me, is not a capital cost. It's an operating cost. Any other thoughts or comments on that? So the rest of the board, I guess the question I have for you is, do you consider this a capital cost or an operating cost? I think it's an operating cost.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick.
So historically, has this been out of capital? Because
Always.
Historically, for
Because
how
of,
long?
because of the cost of it, it'd be very difficult for us to fit it in our operating dollars because it's such a large dollar amount.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
If I could just ask Director Mampy, is this one of those issues where we talk about true operating budget, then we talk about capital budget, then we talk about operating capital? Is that what we're dealing with here?
No, this has always been
Capital.
in our capital improvement.
But this is
fund.
not capital. This is,
I'm not arguing
this
with
is
you.
mowing and shrub trimming and mulching.
Right.
Correct? That's not capital. I mean, if
Historically-
you want to put it in that budget, that's one thing, but
Yeah.
but
We
that
don't
doesn't mean
capitalize
it's
it on our
capital.
books, right? And we don't capitalize it on our books, even though the dollar
Right.
amount is over $10,000.
'Cause
We
you can't.
consider it maintenance, right? But it has historically always been budgeted alongside our road improvement budget within the capital fund. In recent years, with using home rule sales tax to fund part of our, what you want to call operating capital, I think that's what you kind of just referred to, it really doesn't matter.
this isn't even operating capital. This is
Yeah.
this is maintenance.
Yeah.
By any measure.
Yep, just taking it
this
from
is
one bucket
maintenance,
to another.
regardless
Yep.
of where it's paid from. I mean, what we're actually doing here is maintenance. We're not replacing any. It's not operating capital. We're not replacing any of our operating equipment or repairing any of our operating equipment or doing any of that kind of stuff. And we're not replacing a road. We're not fixing a road. We're not fixing any infrastructure here.
Yeah, and there's probably, if we really want to look at it that way, there's probably a lot of items on this list that you would consider the same thing, that they're actually maintenance, but we historically, as a village, have always used our capital funding for them because they're related to our main infrastructure.
Right, and I can see doing that for patching and things like that because it's your infrastructure. But again, you know, your lawn mowing and shrub trimming, you've shifted that towards capital, which basically, you know, gives you relief on your operating side, but it underfunds your parks, it underfunds your roads and those types of things when you consider the sources we use for those. So we're making that trade-off. In my opinion, it's operating.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee
Yeah,
Ruzick.
I would probably agree that it looks and feels more like it should be an operating, but, and I know to an accountant, this may sound, you know, bad, but I mean, can't we just shift it over there if that's the case? I mean, we can always,
Sure, we could.
I mean, so in my mind, it doesn't really matter. I think
Yeah.
what you're saying is we use capital funds to do this historically
yeah,
because it's a
historically.
big dollar amount.
And to me, and
Kind of like
John-
how we did with technology. We made that decision last year
that we are going to use home rule sales tax to fund our technology.
because
Just-
they were big dollar items.
Yeah. And
So-
like I said, I don't have a rhyme or reason for it other than, and I know this is a horrible thing to say, we've always considered it in capital. I think, like I said, the thought was that it's related to the maintenance of our main infrastructure, and that's just where we funded it from. John, if you've been here way longer than me, if you have something different.
Thanks. No, you're exactly right.
But
That's exactly what I know.
switch it to operating, absolutely. Then it has to still fall within that 20% fund balance. It has to, you know, we'd have to maneuver something else to make that work. But historically, we've always budgeted where it is.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
I do notice that in part of this, it talks about paver and crosswalk maintenance. Is this the same fund, just so I understand, if a car gets into an accident and tears out part of the median pavers, tears out part of the sidewalk or crosswalk, is this the same fund that would pay for those repairs?
Depending on what the level of it is, it would come out of the insurance fund. Like, we just had a street light hit, so we're going to buy a new street light out of the insurance fund. We're not going to buy it using operating funds.
Yeah, so if it's related to an accident, something like that, where we would have regular insurance coverage, or we could subrogate that coverage to whoever hit it, then it gets charged to what we call our internal service insurance fund.
That's that question, because a lot of times it seems like we don't have a lot of luck with some subrogation. So if we can't subrogate it, does it still come out of our insurance fund?
Yes, it does.
We just take a loss on it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep.
All right.
Anything else on this? And it sounds like everybody, and personally, I think it should be moved out of the capital budget, but that's my personal opinion. I don't know where the other board members are on that. I guess the other board members are silent on it, so I guess it's going to stay where it's at, since no one's speaking up.
We're just kind of debating, we're just kind of talking into it. We'll let us give some time to look at it, think it through, and
Okay,
see how it's going to affect the operating side.
okay.
We'll talk a little bit about it.
I'm fine where it is.
So I guess to be determined later, you'll take a look at it and we'll go from there. All right. Any other questions on the streets? Bike path?
Bike path enhancements, we have bike pedestrian path enhancements, multi-use path repairs and maintenance, the Dr. Marsh restoration and trails, and 167th Street multi-use path. And that's to Woolcook Road to 104th Avenue.
The one I had a question on was the Dr. Marsh. That's over by the Sportsplex, correct? By where Dr. School was? Is that correct?
No, actually, it's further north in town. This is part of an IDNR grant that we
Okay.
did for a land swap that we're required to do some
I thought
restoration.
you were talking about the
of
marsh
wetlands.
where
Yep.
Dr. School was at.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Guerra?
we're part of the budget is to extend a bike path to the grasslands from Woolcook Road along 167th, am I correct?
That's the 167th Street multi-use path proposed. The $350,000 is for the preliminary engineering. We're proposing to go ahead and pay for the preliminary engineering because right now we cannot get grant funding without the preliminary engineering being done. Once we get the preliminary engineering plans for that path, which includes the railroad crossings and the pedestrian crossings at the railroad there, that will connect into the grasslands, which is, as you know, the Cook County Forest Preserve, then we will go out and secure funding for the actual construction of the path itself. So we did apply for a path this past year to do the engineering as well as for the construction, and we were denied because we did not have engineering plans completed.
So basically shovel-ready projects. that type of
That's why we were denied. So now we're proposing to go ahead and get the engineering done so we can go after the grants.
Okay, and there's some other areas that we're looking to do in bike path enhancements?
Yeah, so the bike path enhancements is something we do $100,000 every single year in the capital budget. And that is those small bike gaps in our network that we can identify and we can fill in. We try to work in conjunction with the Public Works Department, who handles the repair and the maintenance of some of those existing paths. So they're really two separate things. One is closing gaps in. That's why we budget $100,000 a year. And then on John's side, they're out there identifying some of those paths that may need repairs or work done to it. And if we can do them in the same general geographic area, then it's a win.
Okay, and I saw something on 179th Street going east towards Grasslands from, was it 108th Avenue?
Yes, that's another very big bike path connection that we're excited to do. You'll see that in the capital budget in the out years. And that is the same thing that we're trying to do at 167th Street. As you know, living out in that area, there are very few bike pedestrian paths available. And so these two, the 167th and the 179th Street, are very big connections that will get that area of town into the network, both for the Stellwagen Farm as well as the grasslands out there as well.
Yeah, aren't there sidewalks on both sides of 179th Street?
There are some sidewalks as development has occurred, but there are a number of huge gaps. And this would actually...
On 179th, that's Eagle Ridge. It's been developed for a long time.
Right.
Sidewalks are there, right? I know.
There are still some gaps, like along the... immediately to, I'm thinking out loud, immediately to the east of McDonald's, there's a couple gaps there that need to be filled in. And in addition, all right, he knows the area better than me. And then west of Wolf Road, there's some that have to be filled in too. So as you can see, that's in the outer years that we're planning for that, and we would go after grant funding for those as well, once we got the preliminary engineering plans done.
Yeah, I know people out that way, myself. And we ride our bikes and we can get down 104th Avenue so far. And it would, you know, to focus on that bridge or whatever, even if we have to do it in segments, and Southwest Conference is the one that funded that stub, right? From 167th to like 165th?
Yes.
Would they want to help us finish that?
What? Well, that's the $2 million that we're asking for the 104th Avenue is, we're going after STP funding for that $2 million, which is why another reason we push it out to 2020, because we want to get some grant funding for that as well. There's been a moratorium been put on federal funding right now through 2019, and it won't kick back in until 2020. So that was one of the reasons, right? And that's one of the reasons why we pushed that out. But also with the delays at 159th Street, we knew that they needed to finish up the work before we came in with our bike path project too. So there's a lot of coordination happening in that area.
Let me jump in here. So regarding 159th, the latest update is the 4 lanes will be open by the end of the year. I think we're still looking okay. From what I see, we're still looking okay on the 4 lanes through Will Cook. They're telling us the end of the year all the way to 355. I think, unfortunately, one of our neighbors had a water main project that they were going to do in conjunction. Well, then they got delayed 3 weeks. So you know that that's going to be used as a delay that will probably keep it from opening from Will Cook to 355. Because they didn't get started on time and delayed their water main project 3 weeks, that's what's going to happen. Ultimately, we'll have 4 lanes, but we're not going to be in a position to put the bike path or do any of that yet, because none of the rest of the restoration on either side is going to be done, and none of the legislators around here that have been discussing this with IDOT, including myself, have been worried so much about the landscaping portion. We're worried about getting the road opened first and foremost. So landscaping and all of that will get done in 2019, and that's why this has been pushed to 2020, because it won't be ready yet. So there's no point in putting it in our budget, not to mention the changes to the SMTP funding plus the changes to the federal funding dollars. There's no point in having it in 2019. So, that's what I know as well and I sit on the transportation committee of the Southwest Conference of Mayors. Plus the SMTP funding has also changed, and it's going to be much more challenging for us based on some of these challenges to get in the new point system for us to get some of this funding. Any other questions on bike paths? Parking lots?
Yeah, so we have the village facility parking lot repairs and maintenance, and the village hall parking lot realignment and maintenance. And then we also have the village-wide parking lot LED lighting upgrade. I believe that's at the Splex for 2019.
Any questions? Water and sewer infrastructure?
Yeah, this is from the water fund here, the following items. We have the water main relocation and or replacements, the water main replacement in conjunction with the roadway maintenance program, doorstep water main replacement, distribution of system improvements, the pump station, sanitary sewer televising, lift station improvements, water tower aesthetics and modernization, hydrant flow testing, large meter and small meter testing, basin best practice management, electrical upgrades for MPS, fiber optic installation, water main lake surveys, I&I evaluation and reduction improvements, MPS pump inspection rehabilitation, and the Crystal Tree water main rehabilitation.
Are there any questions on the water and sewer infrastructure?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Calendro.
I'm looking at the flood study, stormwater management improvements. And so for Schuessler, we're pushing that back to 2020. Is that, am I reading that right?
That would be in conjunction with whatever park improvements are done through the Parks Department.
So we haven't touched Schuessler grading water. The pond hasn't been expanded. So it hasn't really been improved
We have done pipe improvements that feed into Schussler Pond. We've done pipe improvements that lead out of Schussler Pond. We recognize that there's improvements that can be done to Schussler Pond to improve the storage capacity of the pond, and we recognize that there's some pipe infrastructure replacements that need to be done, and all of those need to be done in conjunction with any improvements that the Parks Department wants to do to the whole area itself.
And Gary, what would the price tag if we did Schussler?
Do the entire site complete is roughly around
850. That's the park side, but then what about his side too?
I fund the improvements.
That's the playground.
Yeah.
Regrading both soccer fields, new irrigation systems, improvements to the baseball fields, field lights for the soccer fields, rebuilding the tennis courts off 88th Avenue so they're not in floodplain, things along those lines.
So 850 plus what would the work be done? What ballpark, what would the work need to be done to make it? I'm not going to quote you on this,
Yeah,
but
I don't have that number. I'm sorry.
well, it's just 1.2 mil. Is that pretty?
Yes, then there you go. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I do have that number.
So about a little more than $2 million to make Schussler improve the parks and improve the water issues.
Right, but this 1.2 comes out of the water. So
I know, but still, it still
Yes.
comes from the taxpayer. Still a dollar amount we have to allocate. So we're looking at $2 million or more to really fix Schussler Park.
It just made sense to try and budget Schussler Park at one time. The residents and the neighborhood.
Gary, microphone.
Underground construction.
Gary, can you, like,
Oh, I'm sorry. John was hogging the mic. Sorry. It made sense to try and complete Schussler Park at one time, as the residents in that area have undergone construction for years now with the Maycliff project and the Fairway project. It also helps us with John's project. Some of the field can be utilized in the soccer field for savings.
Plus, if I could comment, I know we looked at Schussler Park, last year in the fall, we looked at it in the spring. It was much better this year than it's ever been in the past. Much improved, much more usable. Am I correct on that? Because I did drive by it several times after rain, and it was much better than I've seen it in the past.
And a lot of that is due
To what we did.
To what we did, and also the weather.
We had a lot of rain, though, in the spring, and it was still, fairly usable, so.
And we had some good piping that was put in there.
I know.
To your point, to Gary's point about the ongoing work that the residents there, we still have at least 2 more years of work that we're going to be doing within the Fairway subdivision itself with regards to water main replacement, some neighborhood stormwater improvements, and then followed immediately with the road improvement. So they're still going to endure some years of construction in that area.
I guess the point I was trying to make is that it has been improved significantly from what it was. Well, it's not where we want it to be at the end.
There's
There
still
have
room
been
for
some significant improvements.
Yes.
When did we begin work in Fairway?
We started last year,
Just last year?
2017.
Okay.
Maycliff started the
Yeah.
year before that. so
We brought Maycliff in 2016, which brought a new pipe into Schussler Pond, but the actual work in Fairway was last year.
So the general area was 2016
Yes.
forward.
Okay, on to,
the last item before we go back to technology, because we'll go back to technology, is the Main Street Triangle Consulting and Legal Services of $200,000.
why isn't that in the TIF?
It is.
It is, okay,
Yeah. So,
all right.
with that,
Back to
we're gonna-
technology?
Yes, technology. So we have a number of these items that have been able to be fit into the proposed capital. And then there are some items here that if we had an additional revenue source, we could make sure that would be in there. So the human capital management system, this is, of course, the second year of some of our big technology initiatives last year, or this year currently that we're in, is the Tyler Technologies. We have that. We have our Exchange platform update, which are our email systems, centralized cashiering software, Tyler Technology, additional personnel licenses, Laserfish license and maintenance, integration consultant, new iPad accessories, various equipment for public works, water and sewer operations, and that's it. That would fit into our existing dollars that we have available. And then the remainder would be the legacy phone platform replacement, the Tyler Encode case management, conversion services. This is for the police department. Civic Center audio upgrades, access camera and maintenance, Linnell card reader projects, and the Tyler electronic citation software.
So for the additional projects that you're asking for, what are the operating efficiencies or the cost efficiencies? There's a lot of why we weren't trying to do the technology. What will the benefits be if we advance this funding?
So for an example for a legacy telephone system, today it's very hard to capture the metrics of our telephone system today, as well as that telephone system's going to be about 18 years in service. It is still running fairly well. We do have a good maintenance contract on it. But as time goes on and we want to move to more fluid technology, i.e. VoIP, and landlines will start to go away. We have multiple PRIs, is what they call primary rate interface lines that go in there, which are copper lines. They will continue to go up as the telephone companies decide they don't want to maintain them anymore. So the cost of our telephone service will go up over time. So by moving it to a new technology now will allow us to keep our costs in check for years to come and give us the added benefit of the newer technology, the roaming features, the voicemail platform, similar to what we have today, interfacing it with our new Exchange email system. It'll also help reduce our costs for things that we don't necessarily need to have POTS lines for. Today we have a lot of POTS lines that we're reducing our costs.
Do we have
because we
a
have
dollar
one phone line.
amount on what those annual costs would be, those savings roughly?
So right now we spend, there isn't going to be much savings. We spend about $6,000 a month in our telephone costs, which is fairly low for the size of municipality we have. I believe it was much higher than that in 2016 and 2017, but we brought that down pretty considerably. What happens is it goes to a pay-per-seat, which is the way things go nowadays, right? So a handset will cost anywhere between $7 to $24 a month, depending on the user that's using it. If it's a desk phone that sits idle, like at the pool, you pay $7 a month because it's more like a hotel type service, and you can use it to dial out in emergencies and things like that. Versus someone who's sitting at a desk most of the day that uses the normal features that come with the phone, it's about $20 to $24 per handset per month. So it doesn't show a significant savings, to be honest. It shows an actual increase in costs, but the technology, as time goes on, will get less and less expensive.
And how about the other items?
The Encode case management software, the Encode case management conversion software, which is taking the data of our case management software today, our Brazos electronic citation software all sort of come in one package. The reason why we say that is today the police department has multiple ticket books that they carry around with them today. With the Cook County moving to the Brazos system for moving violations, if we were to encompass the Brazos civic citation into the Brazos system that we're already getting with Cook County, now we can start to do ticketing for parking, for property violations, things like that, all electronically. It's all in one system. And then it goes to code enforcement, case enforcement, where the judicial bodies that we have that come in for the ticketing, now it's all in one system. And this legacy system we use today is decent. I believe it's fairly aged at this point, and it's very manual. There's a lot of data input between different systems to keep it up and going. Having these systems together will help bring that efficiency together.
So this will help us a lot with our desire to potentially, because of some of our potential losses, we're looking at our enforcement, maybe being the police doing some of the enforcement and some of those types of things. So this would help us significantly in efficiency. So relatively speaking to the phone system, this one would have some real benefits right away from an efficiency perspective. And that's essentially $117,000? We'd have to put in all three?
Correct. Because we would have to convert the data that's in the existing system today into the new system.
Yeah, Mayor Pico, there's also a lot of efficiencies inside the police department as far as manual entry and dual entry of the same ticket type information that currently occurs, that with a system like this, it would make that all automated, and it would extremely make that whole process way better.
$117,000, seems like you're going to get that money back in spades very
Yeah.
quickly. So that to me seems to be something we need to figure out how to fund whatever we decide to do to fund that. That would seem to be something, at least in my opinion, let's make sure we get that done, because it's going to help us replace bodies with
And
with
replace age
technology.
applications also, so.
And, well, of course, but at the end of the day, it's helping us operate with less bodies, which is actually long-term. $117,000 is one body that we don't have to, that leaves that we don't have to replace. When you're talking about all-in cost.
Yeah, and when we went through, when we were looking at the projects that we would add, should there be an additional revenue source, we really did look at things that would make us more efficient. So the technologies that you see, some of the energy efficiency items that are included in this column would save us on energy costs. Not all of the items in this column kind of fall into that category, but most of them do. So that's kind of how we looked at it.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenn.
One of the items under technology, which is called various equipment for public works, water and sewer operations, $14,400, that would be coming out of the water and sewer fund, correct? So although it's listed in your technology dollar amount, it's really coming out of water and sewer.
Yeah, and we had water and sewer as a funding source at the very beginning when we started talking about the capital funding sources. So that would be part of the water.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
The items that are listed under technology on this page, on this document, I can't find anywhere in the multi-year plan. Are they not included anywhere on here, or do we have a separate multi-year plan for technology, or is it still just this year and then potential if we get the
It's
additional
still
revenue?
this year. We will be working on a more multi-year technology plan, but at this point in time.
Gotcha.
If I may, there is one more efficiency with the phone system that comes into play. As we have the ERI coming into place and the removal of certain positions, maybe at the front desk, who may be answering the phone today, this would also allow us to have a online
Auto attendant?
employee index, so you can go ahead and dial that employee directly or that department directly without having to be transferred. So with that position being moved around, the phone system, again, it's $240 to put it in. It's roughly about $100,000 a year in costs to maintain. You're still going to see an efficiency with that body. So you call 4-digit dial, you put the name of the employee you want to reach, and you can reach that employee directly.
With any efficiency, I should just add that, it would give us an opportunity to reallocate resources to other areas that we may need to fill in the gap because of one thing or another. So
The Civic Center audio, I think we talked about here, and we can revisit if we want to, but the other two things we haven't talked about yet is the access camera and the Linnell card reader. So what are those?
So we'd like to put more cameras up at our facilities. Parks admin is one building. We'd like to have a few cameras out there. Centennial Park, I should say, we'd like to have a few more cameras out there. The dog park goes hand in hand with some of the advancements of the Linnell card reader. So we'd like to if we're going to put some cameras out there, we have power out there. We use a separate software to manage the door locks for the dog park, and that takes an individual to go out a couple times a month to reprogram those two readers every month, every time a resident is added or taken off. If we incorporate that into our Linnell system, which we use today for our door locks, we'd be able to do that remotely and near real time. Once the resident does apply or terminate their contract, we can go ahead and terminate that badge immediately or add that badge immediately. So that's what the access cameras and the maintenance. For every camera we buy, we have to pay an annual maintenance of about $100, and that is for the whole year. But that also allows us our preferred licensing that we have with those cameras also.
So let's just say we came up with half of the money for the technology, and you could apply it toward technology. Would you prefer to do the phone system, or would you prefer to do all the other stuff?
I would say, coming in 2019, we would prefer to do all the other stuff. I think you'll see a greater efficiency with that.
Okay.
The phone system.
And that totals, just so everyone knows, that total is about $188,000 for all the other stuff.
Yeah, we'd want to sit down and talk about that a little bit more, to determine really the efficiencies and all that. I did want to add one thing to, at the very end here, is that you do see that we have an additional $35,000 available. And to Trustee Guerra's point about the Civic Center being a revenue generator for that, we may be able to squeeze, with that additional money, the audio upgrade into that. And I see Director Florentine nodding his head that, yeah, we should.
Yeah, well, I included that in the 188,000.
Okay.
So if you were to do all but the phone system, it would be 188,000, all the ones that are on here. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
Another point to kind of go along with what Director Florentine said, you're not unfunding that phone answering position till mid-2019 anyway, right? Isn't that what we said, or no? I don't remember.
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah, we're
It was already
evaluating it, right.
The door was already open there,
Right,
Mr.
I know.
Lamargo.
I understand. We just haven't spoken to everybody.
No, I know, but, okay, well, yeah, but again, that wouldn't be till halfway through the year anyway.
And that would be,
So-
that's one of the reasons for looking into that. And then I believe, and Director Florentine, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our maintenance for the existing phones, is that the exchange that we're out of maintenance for that, correct?
Microsoft 2010 is the exchange platform we're on today. It is end of life January 1st, 2020. So it's best to get us off it in 2019 so that when we go into that 2020 year, we will have support. I don't think there's any more important software besides our financial software that we have in this village besides our email.
Yeah, I'm just supporting what he said, which is that these other items, if, like the mayor had asked, if you're going to do all the others or the phone, the others you can start getting some benefit out of right away, whereas the phone system, at best, will need that benefit 6 months down the road in 2019. So
Yeah.
that was my thought about that.
Sure. And I believe the maintenance, is the maintenance on the phone system, is that still in existence? Or?
Yeah, the maintenance on the phone system was around $27,000 a year. We're able to get that down to under $11,000 a year. One, because of the age of the system, and two, really because Avaya went bankrupt and it allowed us to break our contract and find a third party that can maintain the system. And they actually maintained it quite well, much better than Avaya did when we were under contract with Avaya.
So we could keep the system, operable. We can get some of these other efficiencies that are much more immediate and then address the phone system. Since we're investing so much in technology, by the time we invest in that phone system, we may not be putting as much into technology as we have to get all the other things up and running.
Correct, we just can't let the phone system get too far out.
Understood, but of course, as we all know, it's all about the trade-offs that we're making right now, and it seems to me the trade-offs, at least from my seat, I think I'm getting a lot of head nods here, that it's, hey, if this thing is going to really drive efficiencies now, that those are the things we should focus on first, and the other stuff, if we're going to defer it anyways till next year, and we're going to move something forward, let's move the stuff forward that we get a little bit more bang for our buck.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick.
So the big ticket item is the human capital management, and I know I've heard about it, but can you tell us what that's going to do and how it's going to help us?
Sure. I'm gonna let Stefana, if you could talk on that subject matter, please.
The human capital management system will be a broad system, broad unified system, including human resources, benefits administration, payroll. We're going to be looking for a best-in-class system that also has either recruitment and onboarding or integrates efficiently with recruitment and onboarding. We're looking for a system as well that has strong reporting and analytics so that supervisors and managers have information about their staff and where their numbers are and that information at hand. So we see overall organizationally that this will be a good tool, not just for HR and finance, but also for the various managers.
So you haven't identified a system?
We have not yet. In fact, we do have an RFP pending, obviously funding for it, but we did issue an RFP and are expecting the responses, I believe, September 24th.
That will also bring efficiencies with time recording. Today, we use for the folks out in the field for most parks, and the part-timers, we use literally a punch card, a time clock. So this will make it a little bit more electronic and streamlined, and less ability to be able to I'll call it, make mistakes on your time card. So
The same system we used when I was here 30 years ago?
Yes, sir.
Okay, just wanted to check.
Wow. Thank you.
I am old. I'm by this gray, honestly.
Any other questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Ruzick?
So my only comment is when we go through the process a little bit further and we have a better idea of what some of the real estate we're going to be selling we expect may net, now I know we don't have that money, so we don't want to spend it, but I think it's reasonable to assume that's going to come in next year. And I think we should, prioritize these other items. I mean, I was a little surprised to see just next year you guys would anticipate, if we gave you the funding, to spend $2 million in improvements at Sportsplex, or over $2 million. But anyways, I think that should be our goal, to prioritize because I think there will be more funds available, and we should think about that. I mean, I would expect in 12 months that real estate's going to be gone. I don't think it should go back into our operating account. And use
No. I spoke with that, so my apologies for that.
Yeah.
Because some general revenue dollars do, or general fund dollars do move over to the capital thing. That's where I was going with that.
So do you have anything else to present or request before we?
Right. So no. So that's all we have. I mean, the one thing that we'd ask that if the just so we could continue to move forward with this project, if we're going to, if the board's not prepared yet for the possible additional revenues, we'd move forward with the capital projects as proposed. We would look at possibly, if we do receive some of those additional dollars through the sale of the real estate, we could kind of put on as in the wings, for lack of better terms. That could be shifted over, pending dollar availability in 19. If we did decide to do the restaurant tax, or a portion of it, or any piece of it, we are asking that the board would let us know by October. And the reasoning behind that is it takes time to get everything in place and to notify all these restaurants, for the restaurants to get everything in place so that we can get ready to start collecting come January 1. Any delay in that will just delay how fast we can start collecting those dollars, which would then, as a result, impact the amount of revenue that we could potentially receive. So I guess we're asking two things. One is, that the board just get a consensus from the board on the proposed capital budget, along with, if we had additional dollars, putting that $180,000 worth of technology needs in.
Mr.
Or
Chairman?
if, I'm sorry. No, I was just going to say, or with the additional revenues for a restaurant tax or something, if we're going to be able to get a dollar amount in additional revenues.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Fenton?
I have a question. Does this first line of general revenues, the 1.65, does that include any of this that we had from last time?
What?
No.
So you don't have the hotel sales tax increase in this general revenue?
No.
And you don't have the increase in property tax levy for recreation and police fund?
No, because these are strictly capital revenues that we historically have used to fund our capital program. The revenues that you're referring to, Trustee Fenton, will fund our operating side.
That was strictly operating.
Yes, the one that we said would be dedicated completely to capital if the board chose to enact one would be the restaurant tax.
Okay, so, but back in the operating revenues, you have that amusement tax, and the board said they would never do both.
Right, and, go ahead.
So again, if the board decided not to do both, and let's just say they decided to, do a 1.25% of the restaurant tax, which I believe
So you're saying
would generate, we would just take that
in
money.
order to balance what you're doing here with operating and capital, you would need 1.25 or 1.5 in the restaurant in order to offset the elimination of 5.5
No,
in the amusement tax.
Mr. Chairman, I think I could address that too, because we just discussed this.
Trustee
last
Carroll?
week. Thank you. Trustee Fenton, what we had talked about, what I had recommended, only because of the efficiencies with the finance department having to administer both of these programs if we did both. Now, I know that yourself and a couple other board members mentioned they didn't want to do both, but the original assumption we had walking out of the revenue hearing was that we would do both. They'd have to administer them both. What I recommended was, instead of doing both, take the restaurant tax from 1% to 1.5%. That would be the extra amount. The 0.5% would go to operating. It would fund about the same amount of money as the amusement tax would. So we
Correct.
wouldn't have to do both. So that would.
Right, I
being
just
the-
wanted to get clarification
Yeah.
for the record to make sure that that's what staff was doing.
Yes, exactly.
So I guess the elephant in the room is it is discussing the restaurant tax. So the board should I'll go ahead and entertain comments on the restaurant tax first, and then we can discuss from there.
Can I just make one clarification, Mayor? So the 1.5% restaurant tax would actually generate about an additional $1.1 million, which is a little bit more, well, quite a bit more actually.
Right, half
than
of
the
that would
amusement
shift it
tax.
to operating.
So, there
Correct.
you go. Half would go to operating, but half would be additional funding for capital.
Yes,
Yeah.
I misspoke, yeah, right.
Understood. And I think that we would agree to do both, I don't think is where the board was at. I think we were agreeing to consider both.
Correct.
We didn't say that we would agree to do it.
Nothing has been
Right, exactly. So, I'll entertain comments on the restaurant tax. Trustee Guerra.
Oh, sorry. Staff has gone over their budgets closely, and everyone else has done their homework. It seems to me the hotel, that's a given. We can go up to the 5% like everybody else. Restaurant tax, we have the restaurants. Carrie, I think, made the statement when we last discussed this, that no restaurant has ever approached the village and asked, do you have a restaurant tax? That's not a factor for them in their location. I've heard from a number of people in the last couple of weeks asking what's wrong with that. Similar to the home rule sales tax, it shares the burden not just with our residents, but with visitors who come to town, and we are more and more becoming a restaurant destination, as we've discussed over the many years. I think we obviously know we need a new revenue source, and I think that's a good one. I support it.
Ditto.
That was Mike Carroll with the ditto. Next.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Anybody else?
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Rizek?
So I am not there yet. I still think that should be a new tax, should be the last resort that we do. You say we haven't asked, or that the restaurants don't, aren't concerned about it, but what about the residents and the people who are patrons of the restaurants? I think if you ask the residents, they may feel differently about it. And I think, I'm looking at this year with $23 million of capital projects without any new revenue sources. If I looked last year, I think we had about $21 million in capital projects. So I'm not sure why this year is the year we have to do it. So I wouldn't, and I guess, and until I saw what we thought, do we have 12 or 13 properties we're selling? 10? Okay. I'm guessing that's going to be $1 million, but at least, but I might be wrong. So I before I would see where we think that is going to end up, I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Trustee Calendro?
I think staff worked very hard, and I would support moving this on and for further discussion, but I think this is the right direction, and we need to start looking at this. I am overall just a little bit disappointed about some of the lack of funding for some of our parks and recs area, but I welcome that discussion. Maybe the sale of property could be for that, so maybe Trustee Carroll, I mean.
Once again, you get all the money.
Wait until budget cycle, wait until operating, and cut everything. So anyway, so for tonight's purposes, I'm okay with moving forward.
Moving forward with what?
With additional funding.
With additional funding, okay.
So you're in favor of the tax?
At this point, for moving the discussion further, I'm okay with saying that we have some kind of additional revenue.
Okay. Trustee Fenton?
Well, I didn't understand what Trustee Calendrolo, what his decision was here, but.
Yeah.
I said.
Okay, so none of us really understand. So are you, I guess the question is, would you be for the restaurant tax? Well, Trustee Dodge isn't here, so I guess he may end up being the tie-breaking vote. Poor him.
I'm for the additional revenue in some kind of form,
Okay.
yes. I'm not sure what kind of tax would be, yes.
You don't know which
Wait a
one.
minute.
Still not
Hold it.
The form is
tax,
restaurant
yes or
tax
no?
right now. That's what we're talking about.
To be honest with you, I don't know exactly what level we want to pull, but I want to pull a lever. And that's the best you can get out of me.
Okay.
So what I'm hearing correctly is that you're for additional revenue in these amounts, so we can go along with these assumptions to continue this.
That's exactly
but you
correct.
just have not identified what
Lever I
revenue
would like to
source.
pull this time.
Understood.
Okay. Trustee Fenton?
I can make mine a lot easier than that example. I'm in agreement with Trustee Ruzick. I'm just not there yet with that there's no way I would do both to go along with that, so that's a clarification. I'm just not there yet. So if I had to vote tonight, I'd probably vote no. I'm not saying I wouldn't down the road.
Trustee Guerra?
For a yes or no, I'm with Trustee Ruzick.
I've heard, so you're a no right now.
Sorry. I just would like to make one point that, all of us go out to dinner. When was the last time you researched what the restaurant tax was before you chose where to go?
The next time would be the first time.
There you go, me too.
Okay, so
Soda tax.
my turn. So I agree.
Make it clear.
Trustee Fenton, don't fall off your chair. I agree with you on this one. I agree with Trustee Fenton and Trustee Ruzick. I'm looking at what we're spending on capital. I'm like, it's a pretty healthy budget, and I'm not sure, and I don't believe this is necessary. And I also go back to, we had a study done on the restaurant tax with the gaming tax, and it showed what the economic impact would be, and it was hugely negative where the gaming tax wasn't. So don't forget that there is an economic impact to raising taxes, and the soda tax was an example of that. Now, granted, the soda tax is much larger and affected many more things, but it does have the potential for an impact. And just because we don't look at what it is, it doesn't mean that somebody else won't. So my position on it would be that that we don't go with the restaurant tax. So I guess right now we're 3-3, so that would still keep these things on the table, but not necessarily approved tonight. I guess to move this discussion along, I'll give my comments on the overall. Some of my thoughts, and then people can chime in. But I guess when you look at your possible additional projects, okay, I would say first and foremost, I would want to fund the non-telephone portions of that, so the $188,000. I think that would be the first priority because of the gains it gives us. Probably the second thing I would look to fund would be the rest of the Sportsplex HVAC, only because doing the whole project saves us $300,000 in the long run. So that's long-term smart. And I think that's a better way to go about it, because that's going to give you $300,000 over the next couple of years you can do something with. My third choice, because we have, as we identified, we have so many parks over 20 years, we probably need to replace them at 3 or so a year. I would definitely want to do another park. So that would probably be my 3 priorities from my vantage point of what to do with the additional funding. The other thing is I would like to see that analysis of what happens if you move that maintenance over into operating where it belongs. That obviously frees up $400,000 in the capital budget. It does mean there's more work to do in the operating side. Shake your head no, but that's what it would do.
It doesn't free up any dollars on the, because we would just have to
No,
transfer those
I'm
revenue
not
numbers
saying to
over.
move the capital funding, I'm saying to move that into the operating funding, which means you have to address the operating side. That's what I'm saying. You have to look at that harder. You understand? Thanks. I think the third thing is we need a long-term technology plan. So I heard that, and I think we definitely need to see that so we know what that's going to look like over time, like with some of the other things. And then lastly, I've heard the Civic Center subsidy. If finance can get us that information to see where the Civic Center is actually at, to see if indeed it does make sense to, take that 40 grand and do that. So those would be the things that I would do. So those are the priorities, and then those are the other things I'd like to see.
So I just want clarification of what I'm hearing from the board right now, is that we're going to move forward with the capital budget as proposed, not with the additional, any additional revenues. We will then prioritize if we do get any additional revenues, i.e. if we receive sales tax, or I'm sorry, not sales tax, additional dollars from the sale of land, or there's a new tax that's implemented if the board chooses to do so. I think I've heard the consensus with the $180,000 of the technology being funded first, and then the others we can, discuss as dollars become available. I just want to. Oh, thank you.
Good.
So would that be an accurate statement to move forward with the capital budget?
Chairman?
Trustee Carroll.
I think it's your position to answer that question. That sounds to me like you're on point with that. I just only made the ditto comment. I just wanted to make one other comment. It sounds like there's not a consensus on additional funding, because if I recall correctly at the revenue hearing, Trustee Dodge was against those new taxes, but I can't recall for certain. The only thing I will say is I'd prefer to look at the sale of village-owned real estate as a rainy day, as the mayor put it, one-time occurrence. So as Trustee Calandrillo said, two of the things we know we're always spending a lot of money on, and two of the things we get the most complaints on, are our streets and our parks. I'd prefer to fund whatever we want to fund, not count on that real estate sales money. If that money comes in, use it as a one-time bump to get us a little bit further ahead on our park replacement schedule and add a little bit more to our neighborhood streets program, because those are the two areas where we constantly need to spend more money.
Mr. Mayor?
Trustee Calandrillo.
One thing that we've never talked about in this budget process is, and I don't know what the board's temperature is there any temperature or favor of bonding, issuing bonds for parks, or for get a jump on parks, or get a jump on streets, or 50-50? I mean, I'm sure it'd be open for discussion that maybe we do need a injection of capital to get some of these parks, and I would probably be in favor of bonding out for some major park improvements. That's just, I don't know, this hasn't been talked about. I don't think that was any issue, but even talked about this whole project, budget process. So I guess, would anyone be in favor of looking into bonding for getting a jump start on these parks?
So the question asked to the board is, would you be willing to bond for streets and for parks?
I need to see a specific need and an amount.
I'd prefer to wait till we get the ARI study back. But I'm just waiting to see what that's going to tell us. John and I have been talking for 3 years now about what that might show us. But I would be in favor of it, like Trustee Guerra said, if the need was identified and it was spelled out a little bit more clearly, yes.
I mean, I would definitely consider it. And you're looking like you're having trouble. So what do you have to tell us? What do you have to tell us on that paper there?
So, I mean, our debt load, our GO bonded debt a couple years ago was well over 100,000, and we're actually down to under $80,000, and that'll be less by the end of this year. We usually roll off about $8 million in debt every year, so it is going down. In our rating reports, our debt is always listed as moderate, so we've never had any high debt. one thing I just would have a little bit of concern with, and it's not that we can't do it, we absolutely can. In the past, in the last couple of years, we established lines of credit at a bank as opposed to going out to the bond market. It reduces our interest costs significantly, because when you go out to the bond market, you borrow it all at once and you pay interest from day one. So that might be something that we want to look at for it. I also don't, bonding for streets, I 100% agree with and don't see any problem with, but bonding for parks equipment type stuff, I'm just not sure that that's something that we would want to do. Usually you want to make sure that what you bond for has a longer useful life than the life of the bonds, and usually you issue bonds for 20 years. So it's just something that we would have to look at and think about, but we absolutely could incur some type of bank debt, bank type loan for something like that without really affecting our overall debt load or our bond rating.
Anne Marie, the 80 million you're speaking of, does that include, because we have 20 million in a lockbox from the downtown. Is that-
31.
Yeah.
30, I'm sorry if I misspoke.
36 million.
Or
36 million.
The 36
So
in
is
the
that-
lockbox or 31?
Well, no.
31
yeah,
or 30.5?
The 80 million that I'm talking about is actually the debt that's outstanding.
Okay,
so
so-
that does include all of the triangle debt. We do have some funds set aside to make the debt service payments on the triangle bonds.
So the 30 is in that 80?
Yes.
Okay, so technically, well, we have 30 in the lunchbox saved for the bonds.
To pay off 36
In the
million.
lockbox, lunchbox, safe, whatever.
Some more Tony Bennett lunchbox?
And John.
So
The answer is 50,000.
So
It's a Spider-Man lunchbox.
I had Batman. Anyway, I like Batman better. Anyway, so I know math, it's about 50 million technically out there that we have. It seems like we have 30. That's the 80 is kind of like
Yeah,
50.
I think we're getting like
So-
the spending and
Right.
the revenue
Well,
side
so we
confused,
can get
but-
into that, but I guess Trustee Fenton hasn't had a chance to comment on this yet. Do you want to?
Sure. I agree with the bonding for the streets, because the streets aren't, they may crumble, but they're still a street. So, but the parks, doing a, what did you just call it?
Line of credit.
Line of credit, jeez, my brain. A line of credit, because you're not gonna be able, he has 25 parks that fell into that 20 years, that were 20 years older. So you're not gonna do 25 parks in 1 year, I wouldn't think, realistically speaking. So if you did a line of credit, it would just be like a home improvement, the same thing, you're only gonna be able to do so much in so much amount of time.
Yeah, so what we did with the roads is we established that line of credit. We drew on it for a year. We did some significant road projects, and then at the end of that term, we turned that into a term loan, and we're now making the principal and interest payments on it. But we still have that line of credit out there that we can draw on again,
Right.
should we need to. So we could do the same concept.
So you could maybe do anywhere from 3 to 6, since Gary just held up 6 fingers, 6 parks a year, but you still wouldn't be doing 25. So,
Well, you'd be in the same boat in 25 years. So,
So
it would
you're
be
open
better
to it. So my comments on the debt is that I'd be very reluctant to take out debt on these, on parks and streets, without a very good payback plan over time and how this makes sense to do. I'm not opposed to taking out debt for projects that make sense and pay back over time. As identified when we talked about the LED lighting, if it was $4 million and it's going to pay itself off in 8 years, it makes sense to me. So there has to be a business case for anything that you decide to do. To what you were just saying, if we were to spend, take out debt to do a lot of streets or a lot of parks, we are potentially putting ourselves in the same problem when those fail, that they're all failing at the same time. So what I would prefer to see is that master plan. What does it look like? And have a plan first. Same thing with our streets. Have our master plan, and then if we see there's something that makes sense and pays back, but also doesn't put us in a bind, and not us, because none of us will be here, I don't think, when that happens, but 20 or 25 years from now, that whoever's sitting here is not faced with the same problem again. So I think taking out debt right now would be premature now. However, if there's a business case for something that pays us back over time, where it's better to do it today than to wait because it'll pay for itself, I'm all ears. for those kinds of projects. And I think we had those projects with the LED lighting. We didn't end up having to take any debt out, but that would be something to do because it pays itself back in 8 years. And if there are projects like that, I think that's something we should consider.
If I could just interject, the ARA evaluation does provide us that plan. It provided us that plan 5 years ago to help us understand where we were, and the update should help us understand again. With regards to the payback, the more money that we can put into the streets now helps us prevent those streets from deteriorating to the point where we need to put that much more money into them.
That's where this plan is important, is to give us
Yes.
the business case.
And that's-
if you give us the business case, then
We
it's
already
someone
knew
can
that,
discuss.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
That's what ARA will do for
Yeah, I
us.
know.
Help us understand. That's what ARA helps
Just
us
to
understand.
kind of further quantify my opinion about that, we had a committee meeting a year or two ago where we talked just about that. This board has always been reluctant to commit itself to a written policy to say we want our roads to be above a certain pavement condition index or rating. And I agree with that because it then binds us to continue with that year after year after year. But we could have a more general policy that we want to keep it above a certain amount without locking in something onerous. And that's what I was talking about. So when we get that study back, we'll have a much better look at it, and perhaps the Public Works Committee at that time can then bring to the board a recommendation if we do want to talk about a program that'll help us from getting those roads to deteriorate. So John said pretty much exactly what my point was on the same thing.
Mr. Mayor,
Trustee Rizzi.
so how many years ago was it that we bonded for the roads, or took the line of credit out?
I think it was 2015.
Okay, did we do about 10 million, 8 million?
Yeah, we
No.
actually did 10 million for roads and 10 million for flood study related projects.
Okay, okay,
Was it 10? 10 on roads?
Yep.
that's what I thought.
That was what the line of credit was for. We didn't
And-
end up spending
Could say
all of
we
that.
did not spend all
Yeah, but
that.
the line of credit was for 10.
Okay,
But you didn't spend 10.
We did not spend it all. And then we came back to the board last year when we converted the drawn line of credit into term loans, and we reduced the overall line of credit down to a smaller amount because we knew didn't need the full 10 million anymore.
Mr. Chair,
Trustee Guerra.
I'd just like to make one additional point, and that is that our predecessors here at the board, when they built all these parks in such a short period of time, they didn't do it without thought to the future. They were doing it as much as we have to operate as a business, we are also a community. It was a response to the residents and the developments that were being built at that boom time in Orland Park.
Understood, but that doesn't change the fact that we're in a position where we are not going to have a boom time because we're at 75% built out. So we have to be cognizant of burdening a board in the future
I
with
agree.
decisions that we make.
That's why I'm not suggesting we repair them or replace them all at one time, but that's why they were built at that time.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Calendro.
Gary, realistically, if you had a blank check, how many parks can get done in a year?
He said 6.
Well, he did, just because
This
he
is
was in,
6.
I know, but the record doesn't show 6.
Timing-wise, we could probably get 6 done.
And so 300,000 a park, give or take, rough numbers.
Give or take, depending on the location, depending on the park.
So we're saying maybe $2 million at max you can use in a year.
Correct.
So that'd be 6 parks. If you look at the list, I mean, in 1998, we had 10 parks rebuilt. And then 1999, it was 6. So I don't foresee it as being in 40 years when we're no longer here. I think it's just spreading the cost and trying to jumpstart our investment in our community. And we're a village of Orland Park. We're not the business of Orland Park. So I would support bonding out or line crediting some kind of infusion to our family parks. I think that's the right thing to do, and I think our streets need that too. So I don't see us. It's not like we're here to make money. We're here to make life better for our residents and our families. That's why I brought this up. Thank you.
So just we know what we're doing right now. We are going to move forward with the proposed current funding source. If there are, on the capital side, if there are additional dollars that the board decides to provide us, whether it's through sale of real estate or line of credit or a new tax, something to be determined at a later date, we'll have this potential additional funding source where the board can then, decide what other projects we'll look at talking to our executive staff here what we believe would probably be the most efficient for the village, and recommend that to the board, and the board can then say yes or no to whatever project. So we'll move forward that way with capital if that is okay. So we'll just make that assumption. Just the one.
So as I guess we'll just get a consensus. So approve the proposed capital budget as planned, with the first priority being the $188,000 in technology funding, provided we find extra funding, which I think, to Trustee Ruzik's point, we probably will find some, at least from the sales of real estate, and then from there we'll have a discussion about what our other priorities would be. Would the board, was there consensus to agree on that?
That's with the staff looking into a line of credit.
Looking into the line of credit, also looking into the other things that we talked about.
Okay, so I just
So
wanna-
you already have that.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure. So the first column is going to be our capital budget for fiscal year 2019.
Yes.
Unless for some reason we get an additional revenue source before we pass the budget, and then we would be able to allocate some of this second
Correct.
column
And the
to our
first
revenue
priority
source.
would be the
And the first-
$188,000
exactly.
technology. And then we could discuss the other technology options. And then I believe what's been asked for you to look at is what would happen with the $400,000 maintenance, which I think, Anne Marie, you understand, have a long-term technology plan, the Civic Center subsidy, what that is, and then also what our potential options will be. We know we have a line of credit, but is there a business case to be made for parks or for the streets? But that's probably going to have to wait until after both of those studies are done, so it's probably not a decision we're going to make between now and October and November. Is that kind of where we're at?
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Carroll?
The only other thing I wanted to add is, because I've been thinking about my lack of a comment to you, other than shaking my head or nodding my head, on the $400,000 for the median improvements, my only thought is, we've already done the operating hearing. I prefer to leave it where it is for now, because otherwise what we're doing is we're moving the goalpost again on operating. We're sending them back to the table to identify more cuts, no new revenue, and I think we're spinning our wheels needlessly. I don't disagree with you. I think it is a maintenance issue, but it's historically been done this way. I'd prefer to switch it over next year, so we're not going back to a previous phase of our budget process.
I'll ditto that. My ditto.
So Trustee Guerra, you're agreeing with Trustee Carroll to leave it where it is for this year, but transfer it over next year?
Well, or discuss transferring it next year at the very least, yes.
Okay,
I'll ditto what they just said.
okay. Anybody else?
I would agree.
Okay.
I would agree too.
All righty, so don't look at the 400,000, we'll talk about it next year, but we'll talk about it before now.
Right. We'll
So
still
that we're
look
not
at
kicking
it.
it down the road again, because.
We'll still look at it.
Yeah, it's probably
and
still
see.
something worth looking at,
Yeah,
because
no,
it's definitely
absolutely. So
maintenance,
we'll
it's definitely
plan for
not
next year.
capital.
So, yeah, we're not gonna, we'll look at that.
Agreed.
Kind of a philosophy change, because there are also other items that are on that list that, the way you're defining it, are the same exact thing. So it's
Well,
just something that.
I think it would be good to know what those are, and it doesn't mean we don't have to deal with them this year, but I think we need to start, I mean, our needs going forward, our capital needs, to the point of parks and streets, are pretty high. So let's look at that and see, but again, we don't have to address it this year, but to keep it on our radar screen, to at least know what those are, so we can start looking at what those potentially think.
Yep.
Okay, I'm fine with that.
Just one other thing too, again, not asking the board, just getting a consensus that we can move forward with the assumption that the $1.049 million in additional revenues that we discussed last week is still
under discussion.
Well, we need that in order to move on with our operating budget. So if the board is not going to, and we're not saying what you have to pick for the revenues, and we're not asking that at this point. We're just asking that, based on our discussion last week, that we looked at getting additional $1.042 million in some sort of additional revenue. Is that still the case? And we are still looking at a total cost of reduction in expenses by $1.7 million, which I owe you another $430,000.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Rizzo?
Is that $1 million figure you're talking about, does that include the gaming tax?
gaming, hotel, and levy.
Yeah.
Is how they came up with that number.
Well, yeah, and it
No,
would include.
1.04 would be, okay. Yeah.
So that includes gaming?
Yes.
Okay,
It
so
also
if
includes
you-
amusement tax.
So if you take out gaming, you just are looking for 700?
Well, the gaming is a given, right? Because that's already been enacted.
Right, no, I know that, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, so I
She's
want to
looking for
know,
new money that's not already
we're already giving you that.
Yeah, and the
That's
hotel
passed.
tax, we talked about a 1%, which is like $31,000. So the two big ones are really the amusement tax, which is $550, and then the recreation property tax levy increase of $188. So those four numbers together add up to the just over $1 million in additional revenue. To go forward with our operating budget, so we've gone through, we know our personnel costs, and we've set all of those. So usually at this point of the budget process, we're going to go to the departments and we're going to say, okay, we've got this amount of funding, fund your non-personnel operating budgets. So until we know what these revenue sources are going to be, we can't really let the departments know what they have to fund their non-personnel budgets. Now, we can go to them, absolutely, and say, okay, we've got this amount because we don't have these new revenue sources, and we can do our budget that way, and we can have all the departments do their budget that way, just assuming we have the hotel and the gaming and not the levy or the amusement tax, or the board can kind of pull like we just did on the restaurant tax and kind of give us an idea of what you're going to include. It doesn't have to stay that way. It doesn't have to be exactly these amounts, but we need to have some kind of consensus so that we can move forward.
So the last meeting that we had, last budget meeting, and Joe, you said 433,000. I think when we left, it was 500,000 is what we talked about. You guys
Total of
finding.
1.7.
So to get to, so it was $500,000 additional. I know I said that number at least 3 times. It was $500,000 additional because a binary choice is not something, not a choice for the board. And so we need to see the revenues and the expenses so that we can make the trade-offs of which is which. And what you're asking us to do now is commit to the revenues again without seeing the expenses. I, for one, won't do it. So it's up to the other board, the rest of the board, if they would like to do that.
Can I, yeah, I know. Can I speak? You're correct. It was a total of, is it $500,000 additional or is it 1.7 million?
We said $500,000 additional expenses
gonna
is
be
what we said in that meeting.
so it's
which
gonna
would
be
be
1.9.
1.767 or something
Yeah.
like that.
So it is 1.767.
It was
right?
1.267, I believe, if I recall, and we asked for 500,000 extra, which would make it 1.767.
Yeah, so it's going to be, okay. So that's one. So that's fine, which we are going to come back with those additional cuts during the, during the budget hearings, operating budgets. With that, my understanding was, walking out of that meeting on last Tuesday, was that the board was committing to the 1.042 in revenues. And
I don't recall us committing to revenues. I think we committed to keeping those on the table, to having that discussion versus the expenses, but I don't recall any of us committing to that to revenues other than the gaming, other than the hotel, which I think we've all pretty much said we know is there. The rest of it, we said we're open to considering and talking about the trade-offs. But as far as committing to those numbers, I don't know that anyone here is ready to do that yet until we see all the options.
Mr. Chairman.
Go, Trustee Carroll.
Thank you. I just want to express my frustration because we have told staff on multiple occasions now through at least 3 hearings that we want to see $1 of expenditure cuts for every $1 of new revenue we're going to give you. We, in the revenue hearing, had identified the 1.02 or whatever it was.
1.042.
1.042 in additional revenues that we said we would give as an assumption for them to work forward from. Now, in as much as we can ask them to give us 500,000 additional cuts, and we can, as you, Mr. Mayor, have pointed out, could pick and choose which levers we want to pull. It's not binary. We may want to pick from column A and something from column C. We could do the same thing with revenue. Keep in mind that nothing we do on revenue or expenses is finalized till we finalize our budget. The problem I have with us now telling them we're still not going to commit to any, at least, strong assumption that we're going to have this revenue, is that now they're going to go to each one of these departments and tell them, all right, we don't have that revenue. we need to cut the snot out of our budget, even though we've identified all these positions we're gonna unfund that we talked about last week, even though we've identified some of these programs we're gonna unfund that we talked about last week, they're gonna have to go another exercise in almost futility, because we're gonna see the drastic cuts to all these departments that we saw last year, and then we walked them all back. Why don't instead we agree as a board, we're gonna give them that 1.042, so they can come up with a reasonable budget. If we want more cuts from the columns that Mr. Lamargo is going to give us with his budget team, we make more cuts. If we want to give them more revenues, we give them more revenues. If we want to walk back both columns and only add 800 new revenue and only ask for 800 in cuts, we have all those levers we can pull prior to the final budget in December. But by keep asking them to make more and more and more cuts without giving them the revenue with which to start as a supposition, it's asking our department heads to basically engage in a three-ring circus, because that's what we're doing to them if we don't say, all right, just for now, assume you're going to have the 1.042, we want to see another 500,000 in cuts, which is all well and good. And we could all sit here as a board and make those decisions, make the cuts where we want to make them, add the revenue where we want to make them, and stop all this extra work that we're making them do.
Trustee Fenton.
I have a couple questions. Questions and statements. So my question is, where did this extra 500, Mr. Mayor, the 500,000 come from?
We talked about it at the last meeting. We said that right now, with the 1.5 some million that we're asking for in new revenue, plus the 1.267 in expenses, and said I'd like to see another $500,000 in cuts, because at those numbers, the 1.5 and change and the 1.267, that gets us to where we want to go, but it gives us no choices to make as a board. And so what I asked for was 500,000. What everyone agreed to is ask for 500,000 and more cuts. Today, it was $433,000 and more cuts, but what we talked about was 500,000. Regardless, $67,000 either way. Okay, so now if they come back with 500,000 and more in cuts, we will actually have some choices to make. Do we make those $500,000 in cuts, or do we make those revenue increases? Those are the choices we have to make. Or we can say, hey, we're going to take all the cuts and we're not going to give you as much revenue. We're going to give you, but those are the choices we as a board have to make. But right now we don't have a choice to get to the number we need to.
I don't really go along with the same philosophy with the 500,000 and additional cuts. So I would want to see if you think you can make more, great. I'm not going to give you a number. If you were asking my opinion on the additional new revenues, I would go with the hotel sales tax, the recreation levy, the police pension, and the video gaming. At this point in time, those are my answers to you that I would agree to. I'm not putting the amusement tax in there because I don't know where I stand with the amusement versus a restaurant, but that gives you an idea from me where I'm coming from, which is short of your 1.41. So I agree with what Trustee Carroll said down there about, we can have you cut the snot out of the budget, as he said, quote unquote, and it can come back and bite us in the butt too. So I don't know, the $500,000 I guess is a magic number or something to get to whatever the 1.7 something. But
It
that's
wasn't
my
a magic
opinion.
number. We asked for dollar cuts, and so,
Okay,
and so we're at 1.5 something, and additionally, we did not include sponsorship revenue in our revenue projections, so there should have been more revenue, which we thought, so we said roughly $500,000 more will get us to where the sponsorship plus the revenue requests were. That would have been dollar for dollar. That's where that $500,000 came from in the last meeting that we walked out of at the last meeting, at the end of the meeting.
Okay, but I also asked Trustee Calendrello, and he kind of goes along with what I was thinking too, and Trustee Carroll. But anyway, that's my opinion. I'm not hung up on this additional 500 and some thousand cuts, but you're going to have what you're going to have. It's like that magical, your checkbook. You've got what you've got coming in, and that's all you've got to spend, and you have to live with it.
Again, there will be some trade-offs, just like what I presented last Tuesday, and I received a couple phone calls already, but there will be some trade-offs, and anything that we're doing or anything that I'll be presenting as my budget to the board would have the least impact on village services, both internally and externally, with that. And tonight we weren't asking for you to identify what specific revenues you're good. What we did ask if it was something like one of the revenues that we would have to self-administer, we'd like to know by October, for the mere reason that if we want to make sure that we start collecting it on January 1, we have ample time to get that all in place, and that more importantly, it gives, those businesses that would be impacted ample time to get all that that in place in order to be able to start collecting that on time. Again, if we postpone it, it's just going to, dwindle the revenue.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Guerra.
Now we talk about the sponsorships, and that's new money coming in, and that's all wonderful. But if you recall last year, when we were going through the budget, the Taste of Orland was cut $75,000 from the total amount that it had taken the previous year, the total cost. And I think the recreation director saw that as a challenge, and I know I was chair at the time, and I thought that was something that we were very confident we could do. We could go to the marketplace and get a sponsorship to fill that gap. I think if that's what we're going to rely on, are sponsorships, and we didn't know that, or Recreation didn't have a confirmation on that until a couple months after the budget was approved, but it was a reasonable request. We're going forward, unless we identify those opportunities, it's not reasonable to expect staff to go out and say we will have new money for.
So is it reasonable to ask them to do the same thing they did last year in sponsorship revenue?
In what, but
So
yes,
if they
but-
did 75K last year, is it reasonable to ask, I'm just asking a simple question, is it reasonable to ask them to accomplish the same
All right,
thing
you
this
asked
year?
a question, now let me answer it.
Okay.
Yes, it's reasonable, but we identified a specific
Okay,
event.
that wasn't in the budget. That was the point.
The
That's
75 wasn't, no, but we identified that event.
Okay, Trustee Guerra, the $75,000 in sponsorships that we got last year was not in next year's 2019 budget. The money that we talked about in there was not new sponsorships. We said there's no sponsorship revenue in here. We should hold staff accountable to generating the same revenues and sponsorships as they did last year. That's all we said. Nothing new, nothing to fill a gap. Right now, it's zero in our
Okay, but
revenue
I
estimate.
don't know that staff understood that. That's, for example, that 75,000 was money we were looking for next year, and it's not specified. Because we have some other events in here that we have never done before, that we're expecting to be revenue neutral, and I don't know what we're basing that decision on. Because we don't know that it would be revenue neutral. No, it's not in the capital. No.
Can I just chime in for a minute? So, whatever the board pleases was absolutely fine. So what I think I'm hearing going forward is that we can build a budget with the hotel tax and the gaming tax as of today, as of right now. Those are what we can build it with. That is going to actually force us to cut approximately $600,000 out of non-personnel costs within the departments in order to maintain this long-term financial plan that I think we all want to start looking at long-term and adhering to. So we will have to do that. We will have to go, when we distribute to the departments and they start doing their operating budgets, that's the amount that we're going to have to cut out in order to make this balance going forward. That being said, I think, Mayor, what you're saying is that if we bring those to you and you see them and you don't want to cut half of them, then we're going to get that amount. The village is going to enact that amount in revenues that will be able
Those
to
are the
record.
choices the board has to make.
Well, and that's what I think you are, is that what you're saying?
That's
So that's
exactly
what
what
you're
I'm
looking
saying.
for.
And,
That we need to have options.
Mr.
Trustee
Chairman,
Rizzo.
and to that, if there's a $600,000 shortfall we're looking for, if the $75,000 in sponsorships comes in, it would be $525, correct?
Yes, and we did not include that sponsorship dollars as revenue because we do not feel that it is.
Well, and my
It
response
hasn't
was,
been consistent. It hasn't happened for more than a year. So at this time, we have not included that as a 2019 revenue source.
and you won't until
If
what
there
time?
is some kind of commitment, so a letter, something, then we absolutely will, but it's
Okay.
just not.
Okay, and then the other number that I heard thrown around was we could save $500,000 by leasing vehicles. Is that, and that was in the operating,
Yeah.
correct?
We looked at possibly just, if we can lease vehicles, and that's what we're evaluating, is that a cut, it's smoothing the cost out over a number of years, one. But again, based on, the analysis, how many vehicles can we get for X amount of dollars is really, at the end of the day, what we need to determine. So if we can get the same amount of vehicles, if we budgeted $400,000 versus buying them and budgeting $600,000, then that's something that we would consider as possibly a reduction in a cost for that year. But we're still doing the evaluation on that we're going to be bringing to the board fairly soon.
And that, I guess, is my hesitation. You're still evaluating, and you should be.
Of course.
But we can't still be evaluating.
No.
So I'm just saying, keep evaluating, we'll keep evaluating, and we'll all come to a happy.
We'll meet in the middle.
We will be in the middle, and we will meet happy.
Right.
And you guys will have done a great job, I know it.
Right. And as I said last Tuesday, that just because we're here doesn't mean that we're stopping. We've already identified a couple things that we're looking at, and we'll continue to do that. It's just to continue this process moving forward. If we know, okay, we've got this baseline,
right,
then we'll continue to do that. I think I speak for every single one of my directors here that, we take very much pride in preparing the budget, and, we're not just going to spend the dollars because it's available. I mean, I think it was evident in the one revenue meeting that where the costs grew, which was, personnel and benefits, not an operating cost.
So back to where we were originally. If you're adding 500,000 or 433, which you came back with, which, at 1.7 million, if you come back there, okay, with the revenue we already had on the table, we're not asking you to make another $1.5 million in cuts. We're saying that revenue's on the table, but not committed to. I think we all committed to the fact that revenue's on the table at the last meeting. And that it's on the table but not firm, and you have another additional $500,000 in cuts, then now we have choices to make, and we can decide, are we going to give you $1 million? We're going to give you $1.2 million? We're going to give you 0.8? I mean, we can decide all of those things, but if we only have this much to get to the end, you have to have this much expenses, this much revenue, and there's no wiggle room, we don't have a choice to make. It's the only choice we have is what's been presented to us. And those additional cuts will give us the opportunity to make the choice of whether we want to make deeper cuts or whether we want to accept those or we want to add on to those revenues, which we've already agreed to keep on the table. Nobody has taken those off of the table. Is that fair enough? Or is that consistent with, I think it's consistent with our previous meetings.
That's my original question. Can we make the assumption that the dollars that were discussed, not the source of those dollars, the dollars that were discussed?
I think they're on the table. I don't think they're committed to yet, but I think they're on the table, and I don't think you need to look for more revenue, and I don't think we're asking you to look for $1 million in expenses. We're asking you to look for the expenses that you had, and then we'll make the trade-off. So we're not asking you to cut the snot out of everything any more than we already talked about.
So just going forward to that.
And consider other revenue sources that we have that we put zero in there, and consider those going forward too, because that gives us even more wiggle room to play with, and that's where the whole sponsorship discussion came about, because as you pointed out, Director Mampy, you assumed zero, understand why, you're being
Just for
conservative.
that large sponsorship,
Right.
yes.
So, so what should we assume going forward? Because that gives us wiggle room too.
So going forward, I mean, these numbers are fluid. Until we pass the budget on the first Monday of December, hopefully, these numbers are going to change. So just today, we got our sales tax for the month of June, and it's a little bit higher than we had projected. So we added about $149,000 total across 18 and 19 to our projections going forward. So that's helpful, just that in itself. We also have 3 other potential ERI participants who have said that they're going to take advantage of it, which has added to the savings that we're going to have going forward. So these numbers are going to continue to change as we go along. I mean, it's early in the budget process. We have to get moving on it because it takes a while for the departments to put their budgets together. But there's going to be movement in these numbers all the time. So when we come back and we say it's 433 versus 500 or whatever, it's going to continue to change like that.
So if I summarize, I think on the capital side, we have agreement on where we're going with that. And I think on this, I don't think it's any different than where we were, which is find the additional cuts.
We got it.
leave the revenue on the table, but I don't think anyone's ready to commit to, this is exactly how much revenue you're going to get, because what happens if you come back with maybe we don't need to add that revenue? Well, if we don't need to add it, we're not going to tax our residents. Keep it there, keep it fluid so that we can make those choices. We're not asking you to do anything new on that side. That's where we're at with that, and then find the cuts we talked about that you said you were already looking for, and then we can make those choices.
So I believe our next budget hearing is scheduled for October 9th, and it would be the beginning of the departments bringing forward their operating budgets. So hopefully we make that. That's a little short of a window, but hopefully that'll be the next one.
Okay. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0.
So I'll have typo into December anyway.
Stop the grass.